Good evening. Welcome to the Thursday, July 25th Village Board meeting. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mayor, I'll take the roll. Trustee Bazemore.
Present.
Trustee Herrera.
Present.
Trustee Levin.
Present.
Trustee Quezada.
Present.
And Mayor Garrity.
Present.
We are in a special legislative session at this time. We have two village board resolutions. Is there anyone here to address the board on either of those two resolutions? Hearing no one, Resolution A. Resolution calling for a public hearing on September 18, 2019 for the Housing Choice Voucher Program Section 8 5-year plan. Resolved that a public hearing will be held on September 18, 2019 at 7:30 p.m. at the Birdsall-Fagan Police Court Facility, 86-88 Spring Street, Ossining, New York, to receive public comments on the Housing Choice Voucher Program Section 8 5-year plan effective January 1, 2020. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Comments on the board. Can we get just clarification for folks? We haven't discussed this before. We're having the public hearing scheduled for September 18th. Really, this process, my understanding is it's really an affirmation of the HUD guidelines, which are a necessary step for our ability to participate in the Section 8 program. But we will have an opportunity in 2 weeks at the August 8th Village Board meeting thank you, August 7th at the Village Board legislative session to discuss it during continuing business if trustees have any questions then, or if the public raises any questions before then, right? Okay. All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Resolution B. Resolution of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining authorizing Green Innovation Grant Program application for Green Roof. Whereas the design for the Indian Brook Water Treatment Plant includes a green roof to reduce and treat stormwater at its source through infiltration and evotranspiration to improve water quality. And whereas the Green Innovation Grant Program offered by New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation has been identified as appropriate to fund this project. And whereas only practices which exceed the New York State SPDES permit requirements are eligible for this grant funding. And whereas cost estimates for the project practices treating stormwater volume exceeding the permit requirements have been calculated in the amount of $162,000, the Green Innovation Grant Program requires a match of between 10% and 60% of total eligible project cost. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes the village manager to file an application with the Environmental Facilities Corporation for Green Innovation Grant Program funding for a project with $162,000 budget, and upon the funding of said amount, commits to provide the match required by the Environmental Facilities Corporation of 10% to 60%. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Comments on the board? I'll just say thank you very much for all the incredible hard work that's going on with the CFA applications this year. This is the third resolution of 3 that are directly from the village, and we're also participating in one with a number of municipalities from the county. And I know CFA grant applications are a lot of work, and the staff is working with a grant writer this year, and we expect great success. Fingers crossed. All in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Do we have a motion to adjourn the legislative session and to go into work session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Alrighty. Before we get into the work session agenda, now would be time for any announcements that folks have of upcoming events or the like.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Just a reminder that the summer concert and food truck Fridays continue at our waterfront. It's a joint effort between the village, town, and chamber. And I believe food trucks start at 5 and the concert starts at 7. And this week is the Mike Risco Band. As always, it's free, and everyone's encouraged to spend a good weekend, kick off the weekend at our Ossining waterfront. So thank you.
Anyone else with announcements? Okay. Rika? Nope. All right, I have a couple. I just want to say congratulations to the Ossining Children's Center. Yesterday, a number of us were down at their new location on State Street. They have now broken ground on the new facility that is being built that will be able to house all of their programs and expand their programs. It's going to be a pretty impressive facility, and yesterday was a lovely day. Certainly the highlight was when all the first graders took cute little blue toy shovels and started doing the groundbreaking. It was definitely the best picture of the year. You'll see it in your Monday Mayor's Message next week, I imagine, because what is a better photo than that? And then also today we had visitors from Westchester County talking about a new program that will be of great benefit to a lot of folks in Ossining, I hope. And what I didn't get, and Karen, do you know, you can tell me when I'm done telling folks what I'm talking about, but there's an opportunity for homeowners and tenants to be able to apply for lead abatement of their homes, and it will be paid for by the county. There's $3.5 million that the county has put forward, and another $600,000 from HUD, so it's over $4 million for remediation. Really, if you apply, anybody who is at the 80% area median income or below, which is most of Ossining, is eligible to apply, and they will come out. Preferential treatment or preferences given to applicants with children in the home under the age of 6 who are the most susceptible to lead poisoning. And they'll come out, they'll do an assessment, and then they'll do the remediation. And it's not of any cost to the homeowner. The goal is to have safe homes for everyone in Ossining. And no, not just Ossining, in Westchester County. My goal is to have all the money come to Ossining. So they estimate that about 240 households are likely to be able to ultimately take advantage of this. You can start applying now. The county is going out to RFP to identify and contract with qualified contractors to undertake this work. Do you know how people can apply? Because I'm not finding it on the county website.
So we will look into that and make sure that that information gets pushed out as the program solidifies, and that's something I'm going to be talking to the county about. So we will be following up, and we'll make sure that that information is available to our residents and that we push it out in every way possible.
Excellent.
Can you also go into the statement going into the record in tomorrow's hearing? Or was it today's hearing?
Oh, it's happening right now.
Okay, I know.
Yeah, I don't have it in
Just so
front
the public
of me.
can know, but just how we did it at the
Yeah,
board.
so the U.S. Census is gearing up for 2020, and Westchester County reached out to us 2 days ago saying that they would be here on Thursday evening. Of course, we're here, so no village officials are able to attend, so I did send a written statement that was just generally reinforcing the message that the county wants to get across from the census, which is that we are a very diverse county. And there are many communities in Ossining that have traditionally been undercounted in a census, and how important it is for there to be resources dedicated to communities like ours, where we are historically undercounted, and that we are, Ossining is very aware of this. We are right now working to establish a complete count committee, Ossining's complete count committee, which will work with community stakeholders. We had a meeting 2 weeks ago, I think it was, with representatives from the U.S. Census regionally who were encouraged to come visit us by Senator Chuck Schumer, who has identified Ossining as a community that is going to need a little help in making sure that we have an accurate census count. The message to the public is very much how important being accurately counted is. It is not just that we are accurately represented in federal and state government, but it is also, it comes down to dollars and cents. We've heard a lot recently about the Westchester County increase in sales tax and that revenue coming back to villages and towns and small cities. The revenue share that we get is based on our 2010 census count. We know we were underrepresented in 2010, so we are not getting our fair share of sales tax revenue. We do not want to be underrepresented in 2020. We need that money to come to our schools and our local governments to keep our communities affordable. That's just a very, on the ground, tangible example of what we're aware of right now. Plus, it influences the kind of funding that we have available from federal programs. So there's a lot of really important reasons why we want a complete count, and we are taking every opportunity to send that message to the folks who can help us with resources, whether it's the county or the federal government. And we're grateful that so far people are really paying attention and recognizing Ossining as a community that is going to need some assistance. Erin?
No, nothing.
Okay. All right. Anything else? All right, with that, we have an exciting agenda with a lot of stuff on here. So, Madam Manager.
Yes, so I'd like to turn this over to our Corporation Counsel to discuss proposed local law 5, 2019 revisions to chapter 201 plumbing.
Thank you, Karen. Building Inspector Joe Agostinelli is here, and we have both proposed local law 5, which is revision to the plumbing code, and the next wing would be the continued discussion on proposed local law 4, which deals with electrical standards. Let me just deal a little bit with local law 5, and then please any questions that you folks may have. Some of these are just changes so that we become more consistent with the county's rules with regard to plumbing. Our code had a phrase called employing or master plumbers. There is no such thing as an employing plumber. The master plumber is the one who employs either the journeyman or the apprentice, but there is no such term, so that term was taken out. And what we have proposed is to put in the terms that come directly out of the out of county law. Instead of referring it to as registration, refer to it as licensing, which is in fact what it is done by, which is what the county does. It also will specifically provide that it is the master plumber, and it is the plumber who has to in fact get the license. Currently, the way our code is worded, it could be the owner or lessee of the agent can get the plumbing license. To be consistent, we thought it would be appropriate that the license in fact be obtained by the master plumber. And then finally, we included provisions with regard, or updated the provisions with regard to insurance requirements, being $1 million per occurrence for personal injury and property damage. That is what the county requires. So if the county requires it, there's no reason that the master plumber coming in cannot provide similar coverage for a project done here. The village law already has a time frame or time limit with regard to these permits, which is something that has now, we propose to add into the electrical code so that there will be a date certain with regard to those particular permits. And there is an exception in the plumbing code for essentially ordinary repairs. And that's something I know we'll have a greater discussion on with regard to the electrical, but those are the proposals with regard to plumbing. And again, Joe is here, and any questions that you folks may have.
Thank you for joining us, Joe.
So my first question is, in the past, has the owner actually come in to get this license that was referred to in the previous code?
No. Anybody that needs to pull a plumbing permit has to be taken out by the licensed plumber.
Okay.
He has to provide his license, and now, as Stuart has said, that we have to include that we'll be collecting insurance information from them.
So in the past, the owner of the home has never come, or whatever that agent person.
No, and if they have, we'd have to turn them away and say you'd have to have your plumber come in, because we have to ensure that the person who's filing, the county gives the license out, and the license that's handed to the plumber actually has, it's like your driver's license, has a picture ID, and we have to confirm that the person who's filing is actually that individual.
Okay.
Further questions for Joe? General contractors were not able to.
Not for plumbing. General contractor can file for their building permit, and then once we issue that permit, and they actually have a permit number, then the plumber and the electrician would come and file their permit, and we would link it together with the building permit.
So that's not changing. It sounds like the only updates that we're making to the plumbing is really language changes and in the insurance requirement.
Correct.
And the insurance requirement is not more onerous than what they already are required to have by the county. Is that what we're understanding?
No, master plumber has to have this insurance.
Is there something I'm missing here? We're just tightening up our laws, what it sounds
Right, and the only difference with this is to, I think we detail in there, like, if you're not altering the plumbing system and you're not adding to it, so if you were just changing, say, a fixture, a sink, a toilet, you can have a plumber do that, and you wouldn't have to pull an actual permit for that, because they're not really altering the system.
Okay,
You're
great.
just replacing an item or a fixture that needs to be replaced in the same location.
Right. So if you just want to swap out for a more efficient shower
Right.
head, we don't need a
No,
plumbing
we
permit for
wouldn't need
that.
a permit for that.
Good to know.
Do you need a plumber for that? And thank you, Joe, for coming in. It's very helpful to have part of what we had asked as a so going forward. Not that you have not been following the law, so to speak. We just, again, like it was said before, we just pretty much updating our codes. Is anything else on our plumbing section that you see in the past that you should be, or I don't know if you had any conversations with Stuart in regards to this, that we should be updating to be consistent with even with the international, with IBC and everything else in there.
No, I think the revisions that we're making now to the code will actually put us more compliant to what the county and the state regulations are.
Now, the applications, you're going to be updating you plumbing applications as well to inform them that they require additional information in regards to
Right.
insurance.
Yeah, we're going to also, every time up until actually the this becomes official into effect, which I believe which should be around September. Is that correct? We're shooting for, Stuart?
Whenever we call for the public hearing, and then it would be probably later in the fall would probably go into effect.
Okay, so in the meantime, we're going to do is have that posted information on our website, and we're going to put that as part of, as the plumbers come in now to file their permits, we're going to actually make documents to give it to them so that they'll be aware when this goes into effect. These are the requirements that you're going to have to start to provide insurances. And what items, like what I was saying about the fixtures, that they wouldn't have to actually file a permit.
All right, great.
So it kind of clarifies. So we do get a lot of questions right now about, people, which is good that people call and question, do I need a permit for this? So if we can give it to them actually, and if we can give them that information ahead of time, they'll be kind of aware of what you're going to require to take a permit for and what you don't.
Well, that information after you, obviously, we're going to be looking at electrical as well in a few minutes, but that will be something that will be in your website as well.
Yes.
To be available.
Yes.
How is this with the villages and communities around Ossining? Is this consistent with the communities?
Yes. The insurance requirement you see in a number of the communities. Some have a lower insurance requirement, but again, since the county already requires it of a master plumber to get their master plumber's license, requiring the same level of insurance should not pose any problem whatsoever.
All right, are we comfortable with moving this forward for a public hearing at our August 7th meeting? Are we ready for that? Okay.
Thank you.
Can I just add, for these two, since they relate to our business community, can you send me something that I can send to the Chamber of Commerce just to update them on the proposed? We have a lot of plumbers and electricians that are members in Ossining, so it'll be helpful.
Yeah, we can provide you with that information.
Thank you.
And I've not looked at it on the website, but typically when we are proposing changes, it's pretty obvious. Some things are bolded, some things are underlined on new language and language that's been removed. If we send people the links, will it be clear to them on the proposed?
It's actually linked, and if they go to the agenda, it's linked on the agenda.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
already on there.
All right,
actually.
so it's
You
just a
have to
matter
forward
of sending a message saying, please be aware we're having a public hearing on these two things that will be relevant to our local contractors. Thanks. So, local law number 4.
Thank you. This is our continuing discussion on local law 4, which is electrical standards. Joe, Deputy Corporation Counsel Tanksley, and I have had a number of discussions with regard to this. We've tightened up the language somewhat and discussed some of the issues that the board had discussed. Just to review, this what would be a new section 114-15 on work permits. It is a significant revision of what the prior section was, because now it will be clear in terms of insurance requirements when an electrical permit is required, the limited circumstances when an electrical permit will not be required, and the key phrase here will be alteration or addition. That's really the critical factor here. It will also include an insurance requirement, which is again $1 million, which is again what the county requires. And to be consistent with the plumbing certification, it will now also have the same period of time for the license to be in existence, and that is it is a 1-year license. It can be extended for no more than 6 months, and if it remains open for more than 18 months, it will be void and a new permit must be issued. So that was not something that appeared before, but now would appear here. As I said, what it does provide now is that the permit must be provided. This is done in part so that it's very clear that the permit is obtained before the work is undertaken, and that the permit must be undertaken by someone who is in fact, a master electrician, as so licensed by Westchester County.
Okay, I think we do have some questions on this one because it's a little more, we had some questions 2 weeks ago, which is why we asked Joe to be here. So does anybody who wants to kick us off? Okay, oh, please, go ahead, May. No.
Go ahead, please. No.
I guess my biggest concern, something we hear a lot from community members, has to do with when I go to sell my house, there's all kinds of hoops I now need to jump through, and I had no idea that I was going to have to spend 6 months and thousands of dollars and all kinds of obstacles because either there's just something that's not in the record, and usually that has to do with the C of O. I mean, you've heard it all. You've been dealing with it, and I know you want to improve that overall in general, and you're working in many ways to do that. I'm worried that are we in any way creating another obstacle if we switched out, we put a dimmer switch in our kitchen? Is that going to become an issue? Do I have to now go get an electrical permit 20 years from now?
Well, actually, to kind of explain a little bit what you were bringing up with the issues that a lot of homeowners have when they're selling is a lot of the homes here don't have original C of Os for them. So to have the transaction occur, the lender always requests some sort of documentation from the local municipality and the building department to say that there's no violations. So we actually do what is a predate inspection. So essentially we set up the predate inspection, we go through the home, fill out basically an inventory. But the inventory that we're looking for in this circumstance is usually, how many number of bedrooms, finished basement, deck, so forth. And we compare it with the village records. And if the records, if what we see from the beginning in the 1950s shows the layout of the house, and there's some additional things that have happened, like they finished a basement, they put a deck on, if we see that there were permits taken over the past, say, 40, 50 years, then that is actually what explains how that deck got constructed. And here is the C of O, and we give that to them as part of the package to take the closing. The issue is when things have been modified in the house and we don't have a record of it. And the lender has done a title search, and title search shows and comes up and says, we have a finished basement, we have a deck, and where is the C of O? We don't have one. So where it becomes an issue for the homeowners is this could have been created way before they ever bought the house. It could be 30, 40 years ago. But the fact that the bank is asking for some sort of certificate, we have to take them through the process of legalizing it, which is pulling a permit, getting some plans, doing some inspections, and ultimately getting them the C of O. In the past, I guess a lot of what I've heard from homeowners is when I purchased a house 15 years ago, this didn't come up. And it may be at that time, when they do title searches, they didn't do due diligence and catch these things. And now, unfortunately, this person now it has been caught, and they end up having to take the responsibility to get what they need. But in case of like electrical, part of that inspection, what we do is to make sure we look for safety things. So do you have the proper smoke alarms? Do you have the proper carbon monoxide alarms? That would be your only fire safety in a single family or 2-family home. And we check to make sure like they have a ground fault protector in the bathroom or near water sources. Say if you have a sub pump in the basement, if you have them in your kitchen countertops. Actually counting out and looking at switches and things like that would probably be pretty difficult to be able to ever determine when was that dimmer switch ever put in. I think more with this was to say that if you do an alteration to the system, that as a municipality, as the village and the building department is saying, you're supposed to get an electrical permit to get these things done. And understanding that there may be people out there who don't do so. But rather than having the village take a liability to say to a homeowner that it was okay to do so because we don't indicate this in the law, it puts the kind of village on a liability to say, we're allowing you to do an alteration to your electrical system and not asking for the permit. So I don't know if there's really, when you're doing that type of an inspection, that we're going to be able to see those type of things. But I think it's important that in the law that we indicate that you are required to take a permit and you should get your proper inspections done.
So I prefer not to say this in television, but we are in television, so I'll say it anyway. It sounds like it's important for the village from a liability perspective to explicitly say we are not sanctioning these actions because they could be dangerous.
Right.
I'm also not hearing that there's a way that it's going to be enforced unless and until somebody sets fire to their house.
Right. Well, I mean, in the same case, I mean, we can have a record that somebody, say, for example, has a rear yard deck, and last year they went and dug out new footings for it and installed them. We weren't aware of it. It would be hard at an inspection for me to look at it and say, hey, those things were changed and you didn't take a permit. We wouldn't know that.
Right. Because they already had the deck and the deck
And it
was
was there,
okay.
so now they did some sort of
Okay.
repair to it. Now, we would need to tell them and say, if you do a change on something structurally, like putting in new footings, you are required to take a permit. And obviously, if the person didn't, and God forbid that deck was to fall and somebody was injured, at least for the building department would say, but you have been made aware that you were supposed to get your proper permits and get your proper inspections and done. As I said, some people I mean, you can't make everybody follow what the rules are, but I think we should put in place what those regulations are to let people know that you've been made aware that these are things that you're supposed to take permits for. And if they don't,
Because we should establish standards for the health and
Right.
safety of all of our residents. Whether they
Right.
take that advice or not, we may not know.
Right.
Okay.
we may not know that they made an alteration to that,
But it is the right position for the village to take, and it doesn't explicitly say that now, so that would be one of the updates with local law
Correct.
4.
yes.
Again, thank you, Joe, for being here. You actually clarified a lot of the questions that I think the majority of us had in regards to what that means for, getting a building, an electrical permit. What is an alteration to to electricity itself within you existing property? What does that mean?
So if you have your existing system and you make changes like you've changed out outlets to put in ground fault protector outlets, or if you've again, like bringing up the idea of a dimmer switch. I mean, you may have had a single pole switch that runs a light, but what a lot of people are unaware of is a dimmer switch, for example, is only used to really lower and dim out lighting. Some people may install it and you have a ceiling fans, and those type of those dimmer switches are not made to handle horsepower of a motor. So you would probably blow out that dimmer switch and potentially you could cause a fire. So something like that would be an alteration to the system. If you change out wiring in the house, even though somebody could say, well, the wire from the switch to the light was always there, but I took it out and I added a new one. You've done some type of alteration to it. You've added new wiring to it. I think, when you're saying, what we're saying here where you wouldn't need a permit is, for example, if you were to have a heating company come in and change a boiler, there is an electrical component to it because you have to have an emergency shutoff to that boiler. But you're not adding or moving or changing the wiring or changing really the devices. You're actually bringing in heating equipment. You put the plumbing together in it. You vent it, and then you tie back those wires to it. To actually have someone pull an electrical permit for that, there really isn't much of an inspection by the electrical inspector because you really altered the system. It's the same system. You've changed your boiler, which is an appliance. Or, for example, if you have an electric cooktop and an appliance company comes in and changes out your electric cooktop, it's removing the cooktop, sticking a new one in, and retwisting back the wire. There really isn't any change to the system.
With that in mind, Okay, because you did mention plumbing and electrical at the same time. So who does plumbing inspections and who does electrical inspections?
We do the plumbing inspections, and we hire a third party electrical inspection agency that does that. In our setting, it's usually New York Electric inspection do that, or statewide inspections.
It's two agencies, but they're contractors by subcontract by the electrician. With it,
They are
sort of
hired by the
independent.
electrician, but they are doing the inspection
Right, on behalf of the
in place of the building department. We collect the paperwork of their inspection reports.
So again, all this information that we have in here, I would like to see being part of an information pamphlet, along with the plumbing and things of that nature that'll be available for anybody who is interested of putting a dimmer switch or putting a GF5 or things of that will think that you don't need an electrician to do, or you don't need to. You need an electrician, but you may not need to get a permit
Right.
to obtain any of those things. So
In essence, it's if you if you had a leaking pipe in your house on a Saturday, you're not going to wait for a permit for a plumber to come out and fix it. He's not really altering the system; he's doing a repair. Or if your toilet cracked and you need a new toilet, you're doing a repair. So we wouldn't put the burden on a homeowner to say, you need to take a permit to do
Correct.
these type of repairs.
and I think we do have some sort of verbiage in regards to a general building permit, in repairs. What is a repair? Like silly example, like replacing a window, sure. Do we need a building permit for that? We clarified that a couple of years back, but that we do not need a building permit for that kind of stuff, unless you're reducing the size of an existing window, and then it kind of, takes away the egress of
Right.
that particular room.
Replacing a window in an
Correct. So
opening as opposed to
things,
creating.
things of that nature, I think, is important for us to have that clarified in our code, not just in our code, but actually have that information available for anybody who wants to do, a home repair or wants to do any type of repair within their property itself. So
Right. So we can do those pamphlets like I did about a year or so ago, where I made pamphlets on general information about code enforcement and things that you need to know about general safety.
yes,
And we did a separate one on what is the procedure of taking out a building permit.
Right.
And actually we put them out at the counter, and a lot of people actually take these things and while they're waiting for either a permit to pick up their permit or so forth. So I think it's been very good and informational. We can do those again. And remember, we did them in English and Spanish, and I think they worked out pretty well. We put them on the website as well, so that people can get that information. So
Going
we
back-
could do that again.
going back to what Rick had asked us before in regards to other municipalities, is this very consistent to other municipalities and what they have been doing in the past, and kind of what does that mean for us? Does one of the questions that someone asked me is my electrical permit is going to be more than what it was if I'm changing something now? I don't want to get into those details, but is it something different? We're not changing or altering any of that stuff. Are we going to change and update the application as well? I'm sure.
We'll update the application to actually indicate the same things like the insurances and so forth on the plumbing and the electrical permits. It's not going to change anything to do with the fees and cost or anything.
Stuart, could I ask you something? You mentioned about the expiration time for this application. Is that going to be the same thing for the plumbing?
It's already in the plumbing, which is
That
why we
part
put it
is-
into here.
Okay.
Up until this has been changed, we didn't have an expiration date on electrical. We have electricals that people pull those permits and they're 10 years old and they're
It
current.
still works. It's still valid.
Right, and again, this is an issue of how these things come up, or when they sell the house and they see the electrical permit open, now they have to, if they didn't get the inspection done, they have to. And sometimes the electrician they hired 5, 6, 7 years ago, they can't get. So now they're spending money to get another electrician to have the inspection done because they didn't close those permits out. So having an expiration on it, like we do with all of our, even with our building permits, when they're coming to an expiration, we send a notice out to the homeowner to let them know that your permit is about to expire, to give them as a reminder to follow up on it. So we would do the same thing with the electrical and plumbing.
And that's going to be part of the application as well, sure?
Yeah.
The expiration.
Yes. Right, it'll have an expiration date on it. And then if they get close to the year, they can request a 6-month extension. If they're already started the work and need additional time, we'll just extend it.
Thank you.
I just want to be clear, if someone wants to change a light switch, they would have to get a permit.
That
If
is
they're
what
not, if they're changing the same device, it's exactly the same one they have. Like if you had, say, you changed the color scheme in your room and you say, I'd like to change the switches from white to beige into the same type, then they can get the electrician to do it, but we wouldn't ask them to take a permit because they're not altering the system.
you set forward. Does that mean you have a question for
No,
Joe?
I want to sort of step back a little bit. So, we all have different roles here. There is protecting the village, your job, protecting consumers and people that live here, my job. So we oftentimes get very into a lot of this stuff, but at the end of the day, this place cannot be more difficult than other communities to move into and to move out of. We have people who buy homes. It's a stressful environment. There are people who live here a long time. They're trying to sell their homes. They may have bought them, all the things that I've raised here. And I just want that to be kept in a reality check, that as a representative of the public, not to belittle what the staff is doing, because doing your job. This is what you guys are supposed to be doing for us. On the flip side of that, some of the questions are about when people sell their house and buy homes, there is a very finite set of days to do that, as you know, more than anyone around here. If it's a first home, the problem in what we're doing for a lot of people is people don't know what they don't know. Bought it 10 years ago, nobody told them to take care of it then, all of a sudden, now they've got $15,000 of fixing they have to do that. The law, people don't sit and watch these exciting meetings to know, even if we put it on the, I don't know why not. So just from what we do here, I need somebody to look at these and protect the village, have consistency. Austining should be equal to everybody else so that when people move to the community, and I don't need it based right on this legislation at this point. I'm just asking that you guys look at that and say, yeah, we're on par. Like if I were to move here, or White Plains, or I'm sorry, that's a city, or Mount Kisco, that people will sit and go, we want people to move here, and if people want to sell after living here for whatever, I'm just asking. Not a definitive question on the table, but just it's a work session. So I just want to remind
Yeah,
us all.
I just want to clarify with regard to what's happening in terms of needing COs and things. Those are changes that have happened on the lender side. So that is happening across the board. Things that, on that side, that's sort of a universal thing that lenders are asking for more detail. So that's affecting title searches, and it's affecting, if you have an older home or you bought a long time ago, most municipalities didn't keep the type of records so sometimes that's a challenge.
And Karen and I have had discussion as well with Stuart that we are looking into having, we have permits that are 50 years old and they show in title searches that they're open. In some cases, it's the information that's given to us on it is not very detailed. It may not have a plan associated with it. It has a description. And it's a big burden on homeowners to try, especially now in person, obviously didn't own the home maybe 50, 60 years ago,
Right.
to tell them now that they have, the responsibility, if you're looking to close this out, that you have to go through the process, just as Mayor Garrity said, about the spending this money to do so. So we have had discussion that we're working on trying to maybe have a cutoff point that if anything is in permits that are open prior to a certain date, that we're just going to administratively deem them closed and not hold these people responsible for things that
Okay.
are so
Well,
so
this
long
is
ago.
very much appreciated. We talk laws because that's what we do. It's a legislative body, but
I think that would
framing
solve
like you just did is very helpful.
right, that would probably solve a lot of the issues of what you're hearing from the public.
Yeah.
That they're being asked to close something out that was done in 1960.
Trustee Levin, if I might, the language that appears in proposed local law 4 of 2009, you will find in many ordinances throughout Westchester County.
Good.
It was
Thank you,
nice to
Joe.
have you back at our meeting, and
Sure,
thank you for
anytime.
taking the
Thank you.
opportunity to also update us on some of the challenges that you're working to resolve in a way that will make everyone happier.
Sure, anytime I'll be here. Thank you again.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you,
Okay,
Joe.
have a
Joe.
good night. Thank you.
Okay. Kevin is in the building, right?
Yeah, it was in the back. It's right there.
Oh, there he is. Okay. Welcome. So, our next item is going to be a continuation in largely of a conversation that we started last week at the legislative session. Thank you for joining us, Chief Sylvester. Before we really engage in a conversation, does anybody have any opening remarks that they'd like to help frame the conversation? Mr. Herrera, it sounded like you did.
Sure, sure. So, for those that are watching and those that are here, and also, this is a continuing of a conversation of a proposal that I did last week with the support of my colleague, Trustee Counsel Bazemore, that would take a step back from how we've currently operated and give a directive to our police department to no longer, as I call escort, but as the police department calls observe, ICE visits or operations in the village. This is coming up now, not in a random way, but because of the heightened fear and threats and climate at the national and state level when it comes to immigration enforcement. Ossining, as many know, is one of the communities throughout this entire state of New York that has one of the highest amount of undocumented community members. So this is of high concern to all of us, and that could actually be found in the Office of New Americans. If anyone wants to verify and actually see which communities are deemed that number. So this is really an opportunity for us to do what little we can do as elected officials and as police commissioners, because there's really not much else that we can do in this role, and that is really taking ourselves out of the equation and really not adding any more fuel to a perception that our local municipal board and police department is working or aiding ICE, which is not the case in Ossining, but the perception sometimes is. There are, I don't like to use comparisons between other municipalities, even though sometimes we do, but we wouldn't be the first to just say, because it's a federal operation and it's a federal enforcement and they have their own guidelines and their own procedures, that I now understand why a lot of communities don't observe or escort them. But this conversation, though, which I'm fortunate that it has created a platform and an opportunity for us to learn about, why we have decided to have this operation the past 2 years, because we were all in agreement, and it was very well intentioned, but due to the climate and due to the environment, that's when we had the opportunity to revisit policy and procedure, but also take a step back and really understand what does procedure mean in this case, step by step. And currently, how we're able to have this discussion or consideration with our police department and with our colleagues as legislators is in our dual roles as trustees and as police commissioners. I want to thank everyone, whether it's clergy or residents or homeowners, the amount of phone calls and emails that we have gotten on both sides have been extremely helpful. I've spoken to fellows, Trustee Bazemore, Casada. They all had, pretty good feedback and questions and points. So I think we're pretty open to kind of find out how we could better alleviate fear, how we could better not support or interfere with an agency that is probably one of the most subjective when it comes to its role or its morals or its values or how we see it. It's probably one of the most to some right now one of the most inhumane agencies that we have in our nation. So tonight is really an opportunity for us to consider the ask of just no longer escorting and observing ICE while they're in the village at all, but also, and this is where I'll transition to the mayor or anyone else on the board, how you best feel fit, is to really learn about if we are going to be one of the only communities that goes out of our way for the protection of our residents, which we have been doing, to go with ICE and escort or observe, learn about the why, but learn about the actual step-by-step what happens, right? So, if we're there for the protection of those being questioned or detained, or whatever they are there for, and we are training or publicizing to our community that, hey, no, we're there for you, the residents. At what point do they call out for help when it comes to our officers? At what point do our officers interfere in an investigation or a questioning? At what point do our officers, assure that their rights are not being violated? At what point do they interfere when it comes to how the entire scene is being conducted safety-wise? See, so that's all the particulars like that are really detailed that actually matter to really understand the validity of us continuing such operation. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and I think I kind of summed it up, but you guys can please add on to what I said.
Is there anyone else who would like to open up with a statement to help frame the conversation? Okay, I would. Did you want to? I've gotten a chance to speak with a lot of people in this room, as well as folks at all levels of government, and we've heard from many, many community members. And I'll repeat one of the phrases that Trustee Herrera just referenced, which is, we've heard from people on both sides. And that statement in itself, which is how we all look at this, is in itself divisive. I genuinely believe that everyone at this table, probably everyone in this room, and probably most of our community is on the side of wanting our community to be safe, wanting immigrants to feel safe in being able to go to the Ossining Police Department when they need help, and for us to be, that our responsibility, all of us in village government, is to foster greater trust between local law enforcement and our immigrant community. Whether or not the path for our community includes continued communication and observation of ICE when they're in Ossining should not be the deciding factor of whether or not we can continue to build trust and more effectively build trust between the Ossining Police Department and the immigrant community. It's a much bigger conversation than that. Tonight, I would like to understand more from the chief about exactly what happens from the moment they get that early morning phone call from ICE until ICE leaves, and if they've taken somebody from our community with them. And I think there's probably a lot more detail about that than what we've had an opportunity to hear in a public meeting. Obviously, whatever is appropriate for the public to hear. We hear pieces of it as it happens sometimes in our community. What I don't want us to do is to be perpetuating the divisive rhetoric that we're hearing from forces at much higher levels of government than the village, which, whatever they are intended at their core to divide us. That is absolutely not what any of us at this table should have in mind. Our goal should be to have a plan going forward that helps us to improve communication and to improve trust for everyone in our community. And that is for the safety of everyone, regardless of how you feel about ICE and our current president. There's much more that I'm sure will come up this evening, but at this point I'd like to ask Chief Sylvester if you could help us understand, what difference does it make if the Ossining Police Department is communicating and observing ICE when they're here versus if they did not? What are the benefits to local residents, which is really why you have undertaken this, I believe. Help us understand what are the benefits to Ossining residents, and what does the interaction look like? When words really matter. It makes a big difference if you're escorting and cooperating versus if you're observing. But I don't really understand exactly what that means.
Okay. Yeah. Full disclosure, I'm the one that used the word escorting when we had originally talked about this. It wasn't as heated of a conversation at that time, and this particular language wasn't really what the focus was. But I've always thought we've made pretty clear what our role in this is. But so to clarify, here's how it really goes. ICE in the beginning was not communicating with us. I've made reference to the individual who had a dispute with them over a threat to an animal that all stemmed from them blocking a driveway. And in my experience in law enforcement, that's not something that's completely unheard of. If really just in life, when a person can go somewhere and believe that they're anonymous, they're going to go back to their office and there's no way to communicate with them. That was a bad interaction where the person thought it was an Ossining police officer. And the best that we could do is give them an 800 number to go back and deal with that issue. So 6 years later, to the best of my knowledge, that individual is still trying to find out or make a complaint about the interaction. Not very successfully. Subsequent to that, a couple of years later, we had the report of a kidnapping on State Street where ICE agents had grabbed the person as they walked out to go to work. They sometimes travel in all different kinds of vehicles. They're not marked police cars, so when they came out of a minivan and grabbed someone, that came in as a kidnapping, which we couldn't figure out for several hours after until we could get a hold of somebody. And then, last of the big three was the operation that took place in front of your house at school bus pickup time in the morning, where they had a bit of a standoff with an individual that was refusing to come outside. And again, the phone calls came into us, and we don't know what's going on. Now, I've said before that an informed community is an empowered community, and for public safety, a large part of what we do is letting people know what's going on in the community so that they can make good decisions. Now, I'm glad that we're going to continue this conversation in terms of perception, because perception is something that I've really staked my career on. And, in 3 or 4 years, I've lived through some real crises all over the country with law enforcement and perception and reputations, and everything from this week with dumping water on cops to 2016 snipers shooting cops in Dallas to Ferguson to all different kinds of things. And what I've really strived to do is to show people, without regard to what anybody else is or should be or wants to be, what the Ossining Police Department really is. So I think what this really highlights is not necessarily that there's an issue with our procedures so much as that there's a never-ending mission to inform our residents and neighbors of what we do, how we do it, and what we stand for. So in terms of procedure, ICE tends to stop in very early in the morning. They let our desk officer know where they'll be going. They sometimes have more than one address they're going to. At that point, we notify the sector cars, whoever will be responsible. Our community is divided up into 6 sectors. So wherever those addresses that they'll be visiting will be, we notify the sector car. We don't meet up with them. We don't really have any conversation with them, but for the one in the lobby, the sector car tends to stay in the neighborhood. Usually, from what I've seen with the cops, because they're not getting involved, they'll sit somewhat down the street. They tend to stay in their cars. And the purpose for that is that if something horrific goes on, for instance, if there's a shootout or there's some other violent event that happens, which is completely possible in any time you have somebody executing warrants of whatever degree. And really, that's what they're there for. In the event that there's some reason that we need to let the rest of the community know, or we need to take some action to protect the rest of the community, that's what they're there for. We do not participate. We do not step in front of. We don't prevent We don't do anything of that sort. We're there as an observation to make sure that if there's anything that the Ossining Police Department needs to do in terms of protecting the community, that we're there and available. And the reason for that is that the agents that come here tend not to be the same ones time after time. We don't have established relationships with a particular team. So if a new group comes here and something bad goes on, I'm not sure how we would find that out other than 911 calls. And since I'm sure that not too many people here have ever taken an emergency call, it tends to be frantic when that happens. Particularly at 5 o'clock in the morning when there's usually one person working the desk. If we take 3, 4, 5 calls at a time, as usually happens if something like shots fired go out, there's one person that has to vet that, and anxious people don't always get the best information. So having a cop on scene in the event that something bad happens is really valuable. This is the same procedure that we do for any agency that comes here. If Westchester County were to come in, New York State were to come in, if any other jurisdiction has a warrant to execute, we do exactly the same thing, with the exception that ordinarily, because we have relationships with the local agencies, they would usually have a detective assigned to them as opposed to the working sector car. I don't know if that answered all of your questions. I might have to.
Good start.
Okay.
Thanks. There you go. Go ahead.
Do we verify if they have a warrant or not, or what type of? Oh, I'm sorry. Do we verify whether they have a warrant or not, or I mean, a judicial warrant? I mean, like so if we're there only observing, like we don't actually interact to verify that they're actually there with that, right? So.
No, ordinarily they come in with booking sheets to let us know, and it gives us things like name and addresses. I don't know how much the midnight tour supervisors are looking into their paperwork, but it wouldn't be our position to step in front of them and say that, if they're going in and they're kicking doors in with something that doesn't allow them to do that, there's going to be some Fourth Amendment issues there. We wouldn't be stepping in the way in most cases unless there's something really egregious. Just the same as we're not assisting them, we're not interfering with what they do. So we don't usually verify what paperwork they have. Most agencies will fax a warrant over if they're coming. They show us what information they have. We've seen their warrants before. They often give us the opportunity to see those things, but we're not really vetting their paperwork.
Legislator Borgia today commented on my post on Facebook, and it just prompted me to, as I was thinking about this meeting, she made a good point. I don't know if it was to you or to an officer or to the front desk, but after one of the visits where there was alleged abuse from ICE agents in Ossining, and she had a big mark on her arm and on her shoulder, she requested that, that is why OPD should be there. But listening to what you're saying, in a situation like that, we wouldn't be able to interfere with how that arrest or physical altercation alleged took place. And just I don't have a recording of it. They don't have it. So I'm just trying to figure out how we're protecting if we can't interfere.
Well, that's a great example because I don't know what incident you're talking about, but I can point to one that sounds a lot like that on Pine Avenue, where there was a person that was detained, and there were some children involved there. And not necessarily physically involved, but there are children in the family, as often happens. And there was a spouse who was extremely upset, as can be expected. For a lot of our immigrant community, we have working husbands and not always working mothers, because oftentimes they're home with children, at least in many of our families here. And in that particular case, our officer was able to see that the woman had jumped on the ICE officer's back. We did not get involved. We didn't interfere. She was detained temporarily, and we spoke with the ICE officers that day. They chose not to charge her with a crime for that, which would have otherwise been a felony, because, I have no relationship with them. I don't stand up for them or anything, but it's not an unusual statement for a cop that enough has been done to that family already. They didn't feel that there was value in arresting her also. She's already got a hard enough road. So that's a great example of how our presence being there actually helped with that, because that's something that, if we're talking about the same incident, that took off a bit with allegations of a real extreme scenario that we were able to confirm did not happen in the way that it was being shared by people who were talking about it but were not present that day.
That's great, and I'm actually happy that we got to actually have our officers see that. But by us speaking to the agents about the trauma that already was experienced, isn't that us interfering in the whole scene and in the whole visit?
No.
So that's just talk.
Well, the officers were there. They did nothing. And after the fact, when people started telling me these things happened, we called and spoke with the supervisors and then confirmed what they said against what the cops observed. It's not interference. What it is, it's getting information to the community. So we have a choice in that situation. We can either allow the stories to perpetuate that something that didn't happen, and part of this is really a perception that this particular woman, and again, it's not my case, so I can't go too in depth into it, but the story coming out was that this particular person was manhandled by a bunch of ICE agents, and there was a use of force there. There was an altercation that took place. It's not an unusual scenario from my long experience in law enforcement that when a family member is arrested, another family member does something that's out of character for them and sometimes displays some unusual tendencies. The officers said, look, we saw what happened. They detained her and then they chose not to arrest her and we walked away from it. When the stories come by, yeah, I'm going to call and find out, because if there's a story that ICE agents came in and were beating a woman in Ossining or somehow abused them, if that's true, I need to speak to somebody about what's going on. If it's not true, I need to have those facts and share with our community. Now, one of the things that ICE does in other jurisdictions that they will not do here or have not done is they have public information officers assigned to regions, and they share some information about who's been detained and things like that. They don't do that here. That said, I don't really have the position to be publishing that information either. It would be extremely inappropriate for me to list those detained because they're not our cases, they're not our arrests, and I don't actually know what happens to these folks after they leave our community. But what it gives me the opportunity to do is to get facts that I'm able to verify through the observations of cops on scene to let the community know exactly what happens. And it's very sad what happened that day. But what we're able to do there is settle down at least a portion of the community and change these perceptions we're talking about to understand what's reality. Now, I'll add to that because we're talking about children being there. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet is after I communicate with the board, my next call is to Superintendent of Schools Ray Sanchez. And what we do with the school district is we're able to let them know that a person's been detained. We discuss with them, and the school district goes to great lengths to make sure that if there's any children involved in that family who'll be affected during the school day, neighbors who might be affected, we give them an address and we say, look, in this neighborhood. And the school district goes to make sure that, again, from perceptions, not only those that are directly affected, but there's other kids in the community that when these rumors start going out that things happen, it can be really disruptive to a school day. So our communication with these agencies allows us to give good information to the school so they can take proactive measure and make sure that the kids in the community are cared for and thought for, and that our schools stay stable as well.
So I just have a couple of questions. In the beginning, when you were talking about, so ICE comes in, notifies the person at the front desk, some supervisor notifies the sector car, and then you say they typically stay a couple of blocks away from the scene.
So we've gone over this a few times now, you and I, and I can't answer this question. It's impossible in police work to tell you where somebody's going to stand in a particular situation. If we do a car stop outside right now, I can't guarantee you I'm going to stand on the left side or the right side. All of this is going to be determined by the geography, by the layout, by the setup. The officers, what I can tell you is they stay at some distance. They're not parked next to ICE. They're not out of their car on the front steps. They're not right next to it. If it's hot out, could they get out of the car? Maybe. If they're cold, could they stay in the car with the heat on and watch? Possibly. If it's uphill, if it's downhill, I can't answer where the cop could stand. It's impossible, not just on this, but on any call for me to tell you where they would go.
I can tell you the one time that I observed this, because I was standing on my front porch watching, and it was Diego Puma. It was like a nationally recognized detainment of a young man, and so that was 2 years ago in June. And the corner that we live on, I'll tell everybody where I live, but is the street between us is quite busy. And as the chief mentioned, it was bus stop time. So there are buses going up and down that whole block. And there's on-street parking in that neighborhood. So they're pretty limited in where they could park a sector car, still be able to observe the officers who are trying to get somebody to come out the front door and not be across, a major traffic. So I imagine where they decided to be in that.
That's a good example, because in that particular scenario, we weren't being notified of ICE by where they were going. So in that case, the sergeant was actually standing next to the agents because he was sent by me to find out what's going on, because the calls came in that there's some law enforcement agency surrounding a house, and they didn't just come from the mayor. That was a cell phone call to me, but calls came into headquarters on the business lines, what's going on. So in that particular case, the sergeant actually had to walk up to a supervisor there and say, what's happening? And there comes the picture of the cop standing next to ICE. Now, I'll tell you this, you know, sometimes I have to make difficult decisions and I have to answer for the things we've done. And two things about photographs that come from our officer standing next to ICE. Number one, I think that if we take great efforts right now to work on this perception, as we've done with so many other aspects of our policing, to really let the community know about what it is we're doing, to talk about these procedures, to talk about our stance on things. I think there's a lot of value in that. Sometimes we have to answer for a photograph of why an officer is standing next to, and I would rather answer for, I'd rather live a life building trust with people over a lifetime and then answer for an awkward photograph that appears to be something different than to have to answer for the alternative, which is something bad happening and not knowing. In that particular case, Sergeant Byrne is one of my favorite people. He's a really nice guy. The picture caught him smiling at the time it was taken. Now, this is something we train. If you stand on a crime scene or any scene long enough, every once in a while somebody may crack a smile at something that's said. However, you know that you run the risk of a photograph being taken at any given time. And that was one of the things that came from that. And, you know, he's been a police officer for 25 years now. And, you know, unfortunately, that moment is the one that was captured in time. And that's one of the things that we have to be really aware of, that when we respond to these things, if we're going to undertake the difficult position of saying, look, we understand what the perception is generally by doing this, but we're willing to let you know that we're taking this risk for your benefit, and then we're going to continue talking to you about it and reinforcing and living the life and walking the walk, that we can't do things like get caught smiling on a scene like that, because you know, you build trust over a lifetime and you can destroy it in an instant. So you know, that certainly is a risk that we recognize, and it's something that we train with our officers right from the day that they're hired, is that people are always watching what you're doing. Act appropriately.
Further questions?
So if I'm being questioned or possibly so if I'm being questioned or possibly detained, because I feel like I've been like giving wrong information then, because the past like 2 years since our resolution, I've been saying we're there obviously for greater surrounding communities protection, but really for the people that are in the home or being questioned or those around, really the community as a whole. At what point can they ask us for help? And by us, I mean the police. Do they like yell what when like they're across the street, or do they? I don't understand what they're saying to me. I like that's what I mean about like once we insert ourselves, like how do we say to residents what we're going to involve ourselves in, and when it's okay or not okay for you to turn to us for help when you feel that you're being wronged, whether physically or how you're being questioned, or because it's technically not our scene, it's just in our community, right? So I'm just trying to understand how I would understand that if I was being told that, you know, if I was undocumented and I was, you know, and we've heard cases throughout the state and nation where, you know, getting the wrong person, or didn't have the right judicial warrant, or they didn't have this or that, and then so then are we technically then? I don't want to use the word complicit, but did we let that happen even though we weren't there and had nothing to do with it, because we don't? It's not our operation. But that's just kind of just
No, and that's not how it works in any law enforcement operation. So I think the term help is it's not subjective, but I think people have different expectations of what help means. I can tell you that I've come across hundreds, if not thousands, of people being handcuffed who will say help. That's what people do when they're being arrested. It is an unpleasant situation, and I've not met one person who's just really comfortable with it. We cannot prevent it. We can't stop it. You know, in terms of if they're going to argue that the warrant's no good, we're not there to play judge on the scene. It's not our place. We don't have the authority to do that, so we're not going to do that. I can tell you that every time they've been here, they've had somebody that spoke Spanish, so they're usually majority Spanish speaking from my experience. So, you know, in terms of not understanding somebody, if they asked us for a translator, would we allow, so for instance, Sergeant Byrne being on scene, if they said we have nobody that speaks Spanish, can you translate for us? Would we offer that? Maybe.
Who's they? I mean,
if
I
ICE
think you have to make it clear who
if
they
ICE
is.
was in an emergency situation where they had to communicate what they were doing with a person that they were detaining, and again, these are like a parade of horribles where we're creating a scenario that's not only unlikely, but You know, a series of things would have to happen in order to get to this point. They'd have to show up without anybody that speaks Spanish, knowing full well that they're coming here for somebody that speaks Spanish. That would be unusual. And then they'd have to get themselves into a crisis where their person can't communicate with, I mean, it's just unlikely. In the event that that happened, if they said, hey, Sarge, can you come over here and just let this person know what we're saying? I would trust my sergeants with their best judgment, being that they're certified translators, that they can certify in court, they can translate in court, that if they think that that's beneficial to the person, that they'll provide that service to them. We don't have a hard and fast rule over when we translate to another language for person. Generally, our cops are asked that if there's anything you can do to help somebody understand anything, you do that. But we're not the liaison from ICE to people to explain what ICE is doing. That's their responsibility to explain what they're doing. I can only say that translating for an agency like ICE would be a very, very unusual scenario. But to give you an answer to your question, might we? Maybe.
So, if we were to, so since we can't really help them, we could maybe translate, can't really interfere in the questioning or how they're treated physically, emotionally, mentally, and we can't really. I'm hearing a lot of can'ts because I know it's not our scene. I don't. The only pros I hear is kind of just the communication from the overall community that helps with the fear and.
No, it's not. I think I've been very clear. I think that the benefit here is that there's local cops who know the area, providing a layer of protection in the event that something really bad happens. As long as we're going to pull out all of the far-fetched scenarios, a very real one is that where law enforcement officers armed go and try and take someone, and this is becoming more and more of an issue now, as I think family members surrounded somebody at something in the city and refused to let the person go. We're not getting in the middle of that. Weapons are going to start coming out. It's going to happen. You're going to say, it may not be here, it may not be now, it's going to happen. And the day that somebody starts using weapons to resist and a gunfight breaks out, I cannot, in good faith, have my officers somewhere a mile away getting frantic 911 calls, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to figure out who's who when they get there. If there's armed law enforcement agents doing an operation in this community, we must have our police officers there to know what's going on. Otherwise, we're also putting them in danger. And I think the bigger issue that we're talking about here is perception. And I think that the way that we fight that is, number one, we go out into the community and we let them know what we're doing. Number two, we let people experience who our police officers are. For those that may not have been there, we had a block party on Yale Avenue last night. It's the first one I've missed. I couldn't make it back from State Chiefs Conference last night. Tonight we're doing movies in the park. These seem like feel-good things. I know somebody used some term, somebody thought it was a magic trick, what we do. It's not. There's real police work going on at these things. And what we're doing is we're meeting families and we're talking to people. We're establishing relationships because we're the same faces in the same uniforms that come back time and time again. And if we're going to tackle perception, perception's not going to come down in a general order. Perception's not going to come down in a memo, and it's not going to be a poster we put on the wall. Perception's going to be done through days, weeks, months, and years of real dedicated hard work by our officers in uniform going out and talking to people. It's the reason that when we do these events, last night was very, very warm. We let them wear t-shirts. Usually, we're in uniform. We want this to be the norm. Our cops that walk through school, this is how they go. There's a perception in certain places in Westchester County, uniformed officers are not welcome in the schools. Here, it's a completely normal thing, and we high-five every kid as they walk down the hall because we're like furniture. We belong there. And that's what we want to be to the community. So I think that if perception is really what we're talking about, I think that we've got a lot of work to do, but I think that we have a lot of options too.
I agree, and you've done a great job. And I was very good friends with our school resource officer, Officer Truditi, who passed away, and John Girolamo. So I could attest to the importance of having officers in our schools and in our community, and it's been great, and it was great. The only thing that I have to point out, though, is that because it takes so much time, it doesn't address the urgent need right now. And because that's more of an institutional overall how we view and communicate and deal and build um, relationships between the community and the police and vice and all of that, which I agree is a long term process. We're living in times where urgency can't wait because it's so urgent, and that's why you're seeing actions from police chiefs and city councils and councilmen and trustees that are very different all over the country. Even some even saying that I don't have to highlight, but that when it comes to their databases and when it comes to their taxpayer money, helping a federal agency for particular purposes. I mean, um, all of that is happening because of the current conditions and because of the elevated state of emergency that we're in. So I agree. I just have to emphasize the urgency and
I think we take urgent action then. I mean, I think that what we do is we do everything we can to meet with as many people as possible to get the message out, to let them know what's going on. I think that canceling law enforcement operations for the sake of making people feel better it may work up front, but I think it's short-sighted. I think that in the long term we lose. And I think that if we take our cops out of the equation, that may allow people to perceive, when we're talking about perception, they'll perceive that they're safer, but they're in fact not. And by doing that, not only are they not safer, but they're endangering their neighbors. And I agree that there's a sense of urgency. I think that it's important for people to recognize the reality of the situation in Ossining, though. As large as our immigrant population is, I know there was a lot about ICE doing large-scale operations last week. They didn't come here. We, in fact, haven't seen them in quite some time. Historically, as long as I've been here, I believe we've seen them roughly quarterly, and they tend to knock on a few doors. But for a flurry of activity after the Diego Puma incident, they've generally kept to that schedule. It's not regulated. It's not. I don't know that it is, but it doesn't appear to be on a calendar of sorts. But they haven't lately been here all that often. So while I understand the urgency and that on any given day this could change, that's the same with everything else that we do. So when in terms of urgency, I think you're right. I think that what we need is we need to start having meetings with the Hispanic community, and I think that belongs cops and people getting together and talking about what's going on, so we can get real facts out to people. And I've already spoke with Manny about lining some things up like that. I've been talking with some other community leaders about doing things that I think really can make an impact. We're never going to reach every person. We're not going to get, just like town and village meetings don't always get huge crowds. Glad to see a few people here watching tonight. Welcome. I think that we do those things, and my eye is always towards getting a few people, getting good information to them, and relying on those folks to help us spread the good news. So in terms of urgency, I think you're right. I think that there's other things we need to do than make hamburgers. That said, I think it should be recognized that, my staff has gone to great lengths to put a lot of stuff together in a very short period of time this summer. They're really stretching themselves thin to get all of these things done. And I think that what needs to be done is add some more formal stuff to that in order to bolster those relationship building activities. I think we need to get the facts out.
So it's been a rough, informative week since last time we met. I'm sure, like everybody else, we got a bunch of emails, made a couple of phone calls myself just to educate myself and the major topics and what really matters in our community matters. Safety, understanding, information matters to what we could provide and what we have done. Early today, we were talking about plumbing and electrical stuff, things that our community needs to be aware. Chief, just fill me in some of the stuff that you have done in the past 2 years to engage not just the Spanish community, but our community as a whole. Because we have seen a lot of interaction from your department to our community that we haven't seen in other communities. And some of the communities actually have taken some of the stuff that your department has been doing and trying to implement that kind of engagement in their own community. So kind of fill me in a little bit in that, because I think that gives some of the understanding and clarification of perception and reality. Sure. And how's your department been working towards have an understanding of what the Spanish community is here. I've done a few ride-alongs, and I've seen the struggle sometimes that even just a couple years back. But just please fill me in what is your department have done in the past 2 years, let's say.
Okay. Calendars escape me sometimes, so I'll give you the last 3 years because that's an easy framework for me. As long as I've been chief, I can talk to you about the things that we've done. I mean, obviously, social media is one of the things that we're most known for. And while to a lot of people that seems like playing on the internet, it's a much more serious concept than that. What we're trying to do is give as much information as often as possible so people can come to have an expectation to hear from the police department. We don't want to be absent. We don't want to be in the shadows. We want to be right up front telling people what we're doing. But also what that allows us to do is actually get the officers out there. And, when a dog goes, people see a lot of dogs on Facebook with us. We pick up loose dogs. There's a couple of different elements. Just to give you an example of how this works. We put a cop in the picture with a dog. Number one, it saves us the money of going to the SPCA and having to pay boarding fees when we pick up a loose dog when the dogs are retrieved from headquarters, so we save taxpayer dollars. Number two, we're putting a police officer in there, and people look at it and they see the face, and they see the name, and they remember the person. And then when they see these officers outside on the street, they say, "You're Officer Shelley, and I saw you with the dog." If you don't know her from being in the schools, some people don't, but now you know her from having the dog the other day. Hey, that's Officer Schwartzman. He picked up the dog off duty that day, and he got a lot of attention for that. So, social media is allowing us to, a lot of it seems very silly, and it's lighthearted and fun, but it's got a very, very serious mission of connecting names and faces to the community. And also, it's our mechanism of literally inviting people to talk to us and being able to interact with people who might not want to come and speak to us in person or might not want to sit through a meeting. You can send us messages. What people don't see is that we take direct messages behind the scenes all day and all night. Just before I came in, I had a fairly lengthy conversation with somebody about trash being dumped somewhere out by a town park. And hey, we're here to answer your questions. My workday is open my eyes until when I close my eyes, and a lot of that is people sending us messages offline. So there's that. The big thing about social media that a lot of people miss is that you do those things to connect with the community, but then you've got to bring it back to real life and circle that back around. So things that we do, coffee with a cop. Again, sounds silly, but what we do is we set up in either the farmers market is a big one. They really like having us there, and we're glad to be a part of that. Every so many weeks we do. We've done Starbucks. We've done First Village Coffee. We've gone all over the place with this. And what that does is it's an informal setting where cops hang out. We give you a free cup of coffee. And more than that, we get you to sit there and say, we fool you into the conversation of, by the way, while I'm here, and people let us know about issues in their neighborhood. And then they find out that, a lot of people say, I didn't want to call headquarters for this because it seems silly. But now that I'm standing here with you face to face, I'm much more comfortable talking to you. Again, we're building that familiarity where people can come with their problems. We play cops and kids sports, kickball and basketball, and capture the flag and whatever else Hershowitz can get herself into. But these are really important things because while a few cops are out playing on the field, the rest of them are on the side speaking with the parents of those kids. And in large part, those programs are attended by the Hispanic community. We target that group particularly by putting these things in downtown walkable areas because those are the families that need the most connection with us. Tonight we're doing movies in the park, totally free. We usually get about 100, 150 people to come to those, but people sit there and wait for the sun to go down. And while they're doing that, we're walking around with the Elks and we're handing out hot dogs and we're talking with people. We're building relationships, and the same people come back time and time again. Are they documented? I don't know. We don't ask. But we know that they're friends and they come back, and we know that their kids are looking at us saying, "Mom, you can trust that officer. He's my friend. She's my friend." The dunk tank, as ridiculous as that is, I can't tell you how many people we've met through spending time at the village fair. Then when we have calls for service, we go back and we connect with these people. And what we're doing is, there's this big push by a lot of officers all over the country of humanizing the badge, and they believe that this is some big thing. I don't really like that. I like just being human. And I think that what's missing, what a lot of people expect, is they expect us to come out and be cops, when what we're really hiring is people who are protecting our community. So all of these things kind of come together and do that. We're constantly looking at more things to add. The block parties, a fantastic partnership with the school district and Feeding Westchester. If you went to the block party, again, I'm only going off my photos and FaceTimes and stuff from yesterday, but you went there, you ate with us. You got a cooking lesson from Westchester Community College and the Happy Ladle. I didn't know they were coming. I'm not sure what the name of that place was. How to take the food that was given to people by feeding Westchester and then translate that into a healthy meal for your kids that's easy to make. Because what we know is that sometimes in neighborhoods like Yale Avenue, not everybody has all of the skills to be making a delicate meal for or a delicacy or some great meal for the kids. So we're trying to develop that same thing we did on James Street. And I'll tell you that some people called me today that might not otherwise utilize feeding Westchester and said, that was really nice stuff they had there. That was really great produce. So what we're doing is we're showing people that if you're in a family that needs, that there's all these resources out there. So yeah, we threw a block party, but what we did is we connected you with a way to get food if you need it. We showed you how to cook that food. You met the police officers that are here, and you know that that food and the books that you got and our teachers reading and the art projects we're doing, the cops are there pushing that out. We're trying to help. We're trying to make Ossining a better place. That's the stuff people are going to believe in. So, again, I think that you're right. I think that some statements should be made and we should let people know what we stand for. But if we're going to talk about real urgency, the real life stuff that follows after that and backs that up, that's where the money's made. I think that we have to keep getting out in the community and we have to do more. And not everything is going to be a party. I think that there's a real need for us to have a very serious conversation, whether it be through St. Anne's or Proyecto Alcance or Los Padres Hispanos or whatever the groups may be, or all of them for that matter. I think that's really where this needs to go.
So you brought that up. You have met with those groups in the past.
I have, and in the past we had a more regimented meeting. Really, it wasn't all that often, but at least once a year at St. Anne's or with other groups. Full disclosure, I haven't done those. We did the one at Park School. We haven't done one like that, a town hall type meeting since, because we've sort of invested our time in these things that had more of an informal feel to them. But I'm all about adding more to the calendar, and let's get it done.
Because that's something that the conversation that you and I had last week, actually on Saturday, a little bit of that, and that's something I think is essential for us and for our community to understand, and what the police, not just in this particular case, but just in general, because I think that was one of the biggest struggles that a lot of people, and you and I had this conversation, even with the previous chief, we had the conversation that there's no trust of a lot of people. They kind of fear a little bit of their concerns and calling the police in case of emergency. So
yeah,
that's
I mean,
not
I
the
think we're
case
fighting
anymore.
an uphill battle because even if we were perfect, which we're not, right? We have our shortcomings and we have our flaws and we have good days and we have bad. But even if we were perfect, we're subject to whatever the news puts out. And the local news tends to be pretty good and pretty fair. But there are some difficult things happening in other parts of the country. And not everybody feels that every cop is doing the right thing. And we have to accept the fact that that's the framework that we live within. And I'm good with that because we're never going to stop fighting this battle to show people how great the police officers here really are. I really believe in these people, and I think they're tremendous assets to our community. Some of the things we did last time, I don't think that we had planned it, but somebody live streamed that meeting we had. And quite frankly, as much as I love being the face of this department, it's the honor of my life to be able to represent this police department, this community. What I really think needs to happen is we take people like Detective Chavez, who's he's not up and coming. God, he's been here 15 years now. I should really give more credit than that. But he's really establishing himself as a real face and representative to the Hispanic community, and it's something that I think that he takes very seriously. And I think to him is for him it's a real honor. I think those are the people that need to be there. The officers on patrol, the Spanish-speaking officers, they're the people that need to be at this. And I really think that what we do is we start with these larger meetings and breakouts. I think breakout sessions need to happen where it's a more frequent but smaller format, where if people want to just say we're going to get, sometimes you have 10, 20 people and that's a lot. We get 10, 20 people together and they have an opportunity to meet with one of our officers and sit down and have a conversation in whatever language they want. If it's not Spanish, I think Officer Rizzi speaks all the rest of the languages, so we'll make him available. But, in terms of our Spanish-speaking community, we task those officers with doing things like that, and it's not really different than the rest of what we do, where we have relationships with different organizations, we meet with them regularly, we deal with the issues that concern them, and we try and find ways to move past it.
I think part of I think we need to figure out what is the next steps.
Oh, I'm not even there yet.
Okay.
So, despite the effective programming that we do, and I'll probably say we're probably the top in the county when it comes to a local police department that does the amount of outreach and programming for all ages. And yes, I've attested to a lot of people actually always highlighting Ossining, mainly our police department, for not just our social media, but overall how we operate, how we're in the community, how we actually practice what we preach when it comes to community policing. That all aside, I do not see that as a correlation with us participating in or around immigration enforcement.
Yeah, but we're not participating in or around immigration enforcement. And I think that words are really important. As long as we're discussing this and talking about perceptions, I think it's extremely important that as leaders, right, those tasked with representing us to the community as much as the community to us, I think that you've got to really, if you believe what I'm saying right now, then I think that you have to be really careful with your words, and you have to be representing the community what we really do and what we really stand for. And I'll take every day where there's a bad perception of what the cops do, and I'll do everything with every last breath in my body to prove to people what this police department's about. But I think that as an elected leader, I think you owe it to the good work the cops are doing to just really be sensitive to the language you're using, because what we're not doing is participating in and around ICE operations. We are going to the area where ICE is operating, and we're leaving a cop there to make sure that everybody stays safe. That's what we're doing.
Right. So with that said, as an elected leader, lifelong Ossining resident, immigrant activist, advocate, emergency responder to calls when it comes to that, what happens to families, the person who's actually been in it, as a staffer, as a elected leader, my capacities when it comes to that, I do stand with what I have said. With that said, though, I think that we have an opportunity as electeds and as a progressive board to really know our role and stick to our role when it comes to what we are tasked to do at the local level. And because ICE and the federal government is so inconsistent, unlike our village and our department is very consistent when it comes to behavior and outreach and programming, and that makes us awesome. Because they're so inconsistent, I think it's a risk. And I also, I've been, up for nights, why are we so different? Why are there so many places that just don't observe, or don't escort, or don't go at all, or have cut their data as a federal government, or have declared themselves sanctuary communities, or all those options that electeds have, whether they're being challenged or not, or political or not. What makes us so different that we can't just let them do what they do on their own?
Because
That's just what I'm struggling
because
with.
we're not those other communities. So I'll tell you that I just came back from the New York State Association Chiefs of Police conference, where I'm sworn in as the vice president. And I can tell you that in conversations with some communities around Westchester, and I said, what do you guys do when ICE comes? They chuckled, because they've never had ICE come, because it's not their issue. That's why we're different. I can tell you that the communities in Westchester, I've spoken with the police chiefs who have similar type issues that we have, say, boy, I really wish we were able to offer what you do to the community in terms of having somebody who knows what's going on. Because without knowing, everyone is at a disadvantage. And I think that, I think what's, I'm sorry?
Knowing what? So the chief said that they wish they had.
Yes, that they were able to have an officer in the area so they can know when it starts, when it ends, and what goes on. Yes. Several of them have told me that. Not just from here, from all over the state.
So, hi, Chief.
Hi, Rika.
I just took some notes down. I'm
Mhm.
trying to sort of organize my thoughts. So I don't generally respond to the commentary because it becomes a back and forth. So let me just give you my thoughts. And you and I have spoken before you were away. So just some comments and some questions. Number one, we've all gotten different letters. I don't know if I get as many, more, few, whatever. We get letters from different people, some to all of us, some. So for the ones that I got anyway, they're interesting. It's a learning. I wouldn't say I got a ton of letters, honestly, but I would say I've received some, and from some of the people in this room. So here's some of my learnings in the past couple of weeks, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions at the end, and then I'd like to discuss next steps as a part of sort of the conversation. It is really interesting to me what conversations become highly divisive, but I do think that on this board, that there is no disagreement that ICE is behaving above and beyond what I think most people around this table, I can't speak for you guys since I didn't speak to Stuart or the village manager, but above and beyond what we would have expected. And that we're in a point in history that I've got to tell you is pretty horrific in the way the federal government and the president is dealing um, with immigrants. You and I spoke about how, for me, this is a highly personal. I am an immigrant and I know what it feels like, not to the extent that is going on here, but to the extent that my entire family was rounded up by people in uniforms and murdered, as you know, makes this highly personal for me. And I think it makes it highly personal to the generation of immigrants now living in our community. Documented, undocumented, it really doesn't matter. When you're an immigrant to this country, it's a hard life. And most people leave their countries oftentimes running from people in uniforms. So there's, to me, already a lack of trust of all uniforms. And I don't think people differentiate your uniform from ICE uniforms, from DEA uniform, you know, every other federal agency, the drug administration, like all of them. Cops are cops to most people. So you start at a place that I think is already a very difficult place. It took me a while to understand some of the issues. To me, we keep talking about the cops and immigrants, but really there are sort of three players in this. I think you've said this. You can correct me if I'm wrong. It seems to me that there are three players, and all we do for those of us that present this is talk about two. There are three. There are the people who are scared for their life, some of whom the entire family is undocumented and terrified, some of whom the children might be American citizens, the parents may not. A tremendous legal issue in this country, right? And it goes from it's a very complicated issue, all being managed at a federal level, of which we basically have our hands tied, is the way I think we all can agree on, and then what do we do about it is where we may disagree on. But it seems to me the third party here is all the other people that live in this community, right?
Mm-hmm.
People like me, people like you've grown up here, you've grown up here, you've grown up here, you moved here, I moved here, she moved here. So all of us have neighbors that are going through this. The third party that I feel you're trying to discuss is by having the police at the scene is to also help things from getting out of hand. It seems to me that if there are police officers that are local, that know the community better than people who are not local, who carry guns, wear jackets, some are visible, some aren't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you're actually trying to prevent bad things from happening. I'm sure there are more professional terms for it, but those are the things I'm going to use. Let me just finish.
Yep.
I got very focused on that conversation when you spoke last time. It wasn't really clear to me, and do I believe that that's what you're doing or not is at the crux of some of the conversation. Is it more beneficial to community to have local police there to prevent awful stuff from happening? We did get, I think, 2 ex-police officers, at least I got 2, that said that they agree with your position. I'm not sure they always agree with you, by the way, but they did.
Nobody always agrees with me.
Well, that's okay. Nobody agrees with me all the
But
time.
your dad
We're
reached out.
You're
He's
good.
the one
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of that, but that's okay. And so I've done my own research about it, okay? And I think that part of the community is no different than oftentimes what the fire department does. You know, you're not just protecting the place it's burning. You want to make sure everything around it doesn't burn to the ground as a result of that fire. That's an analogy, and that works for me. So I had to struggle after last week to understand whether we are better off as a community for having local police officers. Not because it's better or worse for ICE, and I'm not sure whether it's better or worse for the people being arrested, because I'm not sure you can do a heck of a lot for them, to be honest with you. I'd like to do a lot of stuff that's going on at the federal level personally. I've gained 10 pounds since this president's been in office, and I can't sleep at night. But there is not much I can do while I'm sitting here. But on this topic, I had to wrestle with that. For me, in the end, being there is better to have local police, from my point of view, after what I have heard and what I've learned. Now, as regards other communities, it seems to me that in the state of New York and in the county of Westchester, where communities are quite different, the fact that other communities don't have the police could be viewed legitimately, and you've brought this up, easily be viewed that they're doing the right thing by not being involved. It's not your business. You can't help these people anyway. Okay. On that topic, in addition to what I just described, on that topic, let me say that another way to look at exactly that scenario, I may be wrong, I may not get it, but there are just as many police officers in the state of New York who don't support immigrant communities and stay the hell out of it, not because they are being helpful to the immigrant population in their community. We live in a state that is both Democratic and Republican, upstate and downstate. We live in a county that has communities that are significantly different. And while, as you heard on the previous topic, I like to know what's going on in the communities, it is, in my opinion, also fair to say that the reason that some of his colleagues stay out is not because they're nice guys to the immigrants. And I'd like this board to consider that as also an option. Consider it. You don't have to agree with me. It is my opinion that in the communities in this county, that is exactly what's happening. And I am not proud of living in a county where people do that. That is not a good thing to stay out of it, in my opinion. And to say that we should follow that. Now, I did speak to the councilwoman up north from us. In Peekskill, as you know, they took another tact. I can name a couple of more, but I can't name a whole bunch with good intentions. So for me, that analogy doesn't really hold a lot of water. It always comes back to the same thing. Is the entire community, the people who are being arrested by a federal agency and the people that are their neighbors, better off for having local police be in the area? I have to tell you, it does not make me feel good, Chief, to have the police so close that they're standing there leaning on a car, and every picture on social media makes it look like they're a part of it. It has created a perception, and it's very hard to get rid of it. I wish, as a next step, I do wish, because this is a national issue that has spilled into this community in a real way, that there are more courses and more conversations and more discussions that you get back to us on. That conversations, and I believe that training is necessary on how one deals in this environment that is a little wacko, to be honest with you. It's not like ICE hasn't been around all the time. It's a serious issue, and it's frightening to this community. And I think the community would be better off if one of the next step is to know, not as just a matter of policy, but there is actually ongoing. There's no difference between teaching about sexual harassment, about race relations, about, I don't know, drug uses, massage parlors. I mean, like the whole plethora of things that police deal with every day, right? How one does traffic, everything.
Mm-hmm.
I would appreciate as a next step to come back to us with some sort of a plan. I have discussed this with my colleagues, but this is a work session, not a legislative session. It would behoove us, and it would behoove you, to have some plan on, even in a very quick term, in addition to what was brought on by Manny about rekindling more meetings, more than once, because this is a serious issue, right? I'm sort of disgusted with the whole thing, so I'm sorry if but I'd like to come up with some steps. So 2 for me would be actually putting a policy together that you put together. To the point of the simple ask that was brought in by Trustee Herrera. Again, with all due respect, a simple ask is not what this is. You want us to function as police commissioners in a way that we have not done before. Do not really have a policy, and I am personally not in support of or comfortable with, to override professional staff who are professionals and have a belief that this is how they should run the police department. It would be the same as overriding our village manager, our engineer, our attorney. Do we have a right to do that legally? Probably. Is it something that we often want to do? I personally prefer not to, because the staff who are professionals have experience that I, for example, don't have. I'm a person who lives in this community. Am I, the dumbest person in any room I enter? Probably not. I'm also not the smartest. It's not what I do for a living. I have an opinion about things. Unless it can be proven that I know something, or that any of us know so much more about police action, that we should override what the police chief believes is the right thing to do. I'm not so comfortable when there are other alternatives, because I haven't seen proof that removing the police officers from observing, which is what you're telling us they're doing, I've written it like 5 different ways and times tonight, so tell me I'm right about that because it better be accurate.
Yes.
Okay. Will not prevent ICE from picking up anybody, will not prevent people from getting hurt. Us removing and overriding the chief of police will not help the scenario. It might make this community look better on social media that we don't have our cops standing there and people will feel better that we're not helping, but it's not the case to begin with, frankly. So the conversation's great because I wouldn't have done any of this or asked anything about anything for the past couple of weeks if you did not bring it up. But I don't see one person not being arrested by ICE if we remove the local police. And therefore, it is not a solution to the problem. It's a solution to something else, I guess, but it's not a solution to what we really want, is that ICE stay the hell out of our community and stop coming here. That would be a great thing. But what you're suggesting and what you brought up, and I point to you because you and Counsel brought it up, that's the only reason, I don't believe solves any of this. So for me, it's not strong enough. I do, however, think that you do owe the public something going forward of how you are training people to make sure that they are there, that they're standing in the right place, that they're observing, that they're documenting. I also believe in my heart, and I have no proof of this, and I'm not an expert in it, that when a federal agency comes to a community and they see local cops, they've got to believe that they behave a little bit better. And if nobody locally, who also wears a gun and knows the rules, is standing there. And for me, that actually works at this point in time. So those are sort of the notes. I want you to correct any of my, if I'm wrong about what they're doing, if
No,
you
this
disagree
is
with
good.
something I'm saying, I don't know.
So hold on one second, Chief, because I am mindful of the time and the rest of our agenda, and
Okay.
so this is a very important conversation. Everybody has contributed, so I want Chief Sylvester to be able to give feedback to Rika's comments and any final thoughts and clarifications that trustees need, and then I want to weigh in with what I'm hearing and my recap of where we are and what we've been hearing from the community. So please, Chief.
First, I sincerely appreciate the things you've said. Your confidence means the world to me, and I think that it means the world to the rest of the department. But it's also a heavy responsibility. And I know that what I'm not looking for here is for board members to just say, the chief is right, the board is wrong, someone else is right. This is not a zero-sum environment. But I do take very seriously my responsibility to this community. Very, very seriously. Sometimes my children say too seriously as they text me from the St. Augustine's Fair. And I think that you're right on the money. I think that where any agent, this isn't about ICE, where anybody comes into another jurisdiction to operate and a local officer is there, it's going to keep them on their toes. And I don't think that's law enforcement centric. I think that's true of anybody that goes to work in anybody else's office, is that if you go and if you're on vacation and you're there and you think nobody's watching, you may act differently than if you knew that your neighbors were there and they're going to remember what happens when you come back. So in terms of law enforcement, yeah, I think that's it's undeniable that where an agency, particularly with the federal agencies, right? I don't really have. Let me go off topic for 1 second here. You talked about there being different sides, and I think it's really important for people to recognize that we don't stand on the side of ICE. We're not for or against. We really try our best to be objective in all these things, and that's the reason that I'm not getting into. I understand the board's position with discussions about policy and federal agencies and all that kind of stuff. We're doing our best to keep it local. So, and that's our role. That's our place. I'm trying to stay in my lane. In terms of that perception, though, I think that when someone works for a federal agency where they don't have a hometown and they're not wearing heavily identifiable stuff and you're doing law enforcement activities, it's very easy to believe that nobody's going to know who you are or what you did. And we saw this in play with the issue, with the incident on Broadway. So I do think, and again, this is a prompt that you gave me, but it's something that we think and we don't always share with the public because it's just not on the top of my brain, because it's part of our DNA that, yeah, we want to be there when any agency comes in because we have high standards and they know we have high standards, and we expect that there's going to at least be an incremental improvement in behavior knowing that we're there. I can't guarantee everybody does everything perfectly all the time, but I'll tell you that people will be much less likely to step out of line knowing that an Ossining police officer is staying there, because we've made very public who we are, what we stand for. In terms of where we go from here, I think you're right. This needs to be very much a directed effort, and I think that it needs to be documented and targeted, and it needs to be public. So I think there's a lot of options. I'd prefer to keep that plan for the next time we meet if I could have an opportunity, so I can just, I really, not only do I want to be able to research some more ideas on how we do this, but I want to be able to sit down with staff and put, people in place, because I think my ideas are not the only ideas, and sometimes I think those officers that touch the community on a daily basis sometimes have the best ideas. So, in terms of giving you an answer for that, and that includes both training for the department, as well as community outreach type stuff. I think that really we can do some amazing things, and with a sense of urgency. I recognize that the timing is important to this, but I need a couple days to put some people together.
So I'm a next step kind of
Sure.
gal. Time frame, like 2 weeks, 1 week.
Well,
when can you start?
I
Like,
plan on
start
meeting with
telling
you
us-
next Wednesday.
Okay.
At
No, it's the
11.
fifth Wednesday. No one will be there. Please. We have 2 weeks. We
I
have
don't
2
know if
weeks
the
to really
camera's
flesh
got
this
that.
out.
Sorry.
We can have lots of offline conversations. next
Yeah,
Wednesday.
I mean, if you want a deadline, I mean, just to make sure I'm.
We'll
I'm
see
in
each other
town,
on,
so.
on August 7th. We're going to continue this conversation and see where we are at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I've got nothing by next week. I'll be glad to email the board and give you some ideas for next week. That's not an unreasonable request. It doesn't take us a long time, and quite frankly, where you're given the confidence of a board to go out and be empowered to do the job that you're tasked with, I think that creates a lot of excitement in a lot of people. So I expect some good things.
Other final questions, clarifications?
Yes. Well, I first want to thank my colleagues and the chief. There's really, especially now more than ever, there's no more of a controversial time to discuss something so hard and troubling. So thank you for your patience, and because we all get pulled and get reactions from all angles, and it's not easy. So thank you. I called, and I still call it a simple ask, because I had to see, as an elected official and as a police commissioner, what is that I could actually do? What can this body actually do when it comes to its ability? I realize that when it comes to this particular agency, because this is a conversation about this particular agency, that's really all that I thought, and I identified as something that we could stop. As far as just because I disagree with the chief on this notion does not mean that I'm not supportive, or does not mean that I don't trust. It's just that we have a disagreement on an issue. But I have to point out that whether you're a department head, whether you're the police chief, whether you're a fire chief, whether you're the village manager, it's okay to disagree. And part of the democratic process and the policymaking process is working together and really finding a way to either compromise or to really find a balancing act. But I don't want the public to think that the chief always has to be in agreement with the board, and the board always has to be in agreement with him or her, because that is not the case. That is not how our government or our charter is structured. There is, everyone has their role and their abilities, and we're a team, and we try to work together, and we, as you see, are going to move forward together. I do still think, though, that given the behavior of this agency and how it's changing, or whether it's threats or not, that us being there observing is a mistake, and it puts us at a federal scene, period. And despite all of my efforts, because the past 4 years, the amount of work that I've done with agencies and nonprofits and churches and synagogues and neighborhood groups that have all stepped up, we kind of have stepped back now, and we feel like we haven't been effective because the perception is still there. Is the school sharing this? Is the police doing this? So I'm not saying that we've been ineffective, but I'm saying that despite our good intentions through programming in our safety nets and in our houses of worship, due to the force of the federal government and the media at times not helping, people's perception against authorities or their role has actually worsened nationwide. In Ossining, not so much, but when it comes to immigration, when I go around and I talk to, and um, maybe, I mean, two of us, three of us can go to certain house meetings that I go to for you to hear it yourself. Yes, you may have a whole room of people who are kind of getting translated to, kind of not, because they're not all Spanish. We have we have some Italians, we have some Portuguese. I mean, it's a melting pot of people who are undocumented in Ossining. And just because they nod at you and they get a know your rights card, don't assume that they trust Omar and the chief and the police and the board. Is it a continued work in progress and process? Yes. But because of the urgency and the instability of the federal government, I don't see how I could explain this continued behavior to anyone in Ossining, especially the communities being affected by it and the communities that are thinking twice about going to work or going to church or sending their kids to school. So I will continue to be part of a process. I will support. I mean, there's already been an agreement that we're going to better how we communicate. There's going to be more outreach, which is a plus to this whole conversation. But I have to live up to my local community and the ability that I have as an elected, and my work within this particular group, whether you're Spanish or Irish or whatever undocumented group that you're in, there's so much more to be done, and I don't, given the legal structure and the separation of powers and how the federal government works when it comes to immigration enforcement, immigration campaigns, immigration raids, immigration timelines, the president's ability to change that, to alter that, to revise that, to propose. Um, I don't think it's wise for a community to use its resources in any way to aid an agency that will historically be known as one of the most cruel and inhumane agencies in our nation. Thank you for your time.
So, Chief, thank you for definitely explaining the process. There are certain things you said tonight that I couldn't agree more. I think oftentimes when it comes to perception, police have a public bank. And if something happens in another community, um, whatever trust you may have, you know, you may lose something in that public bank. I think a lot of the activities that you've done over the last 2 years, 4 years, um, you definitely softened and really opened this community up to the police department. I think that's valuable work. However, um, I could change the language and say that we are going into areas to make sure that everybody is safe. But as has been stated many times around this table, your presence cannot stop anyone from getting arrested. Um, your presence doesn't stop, family members from being split apart. And what makes this such a major issue is because this is ICE. This is an agency that right now um, people find morally corrupt. They find that what's happening right now with families being split highly problematic. And so if I am the kid and you come and get my mother or my father, at that moment I am not safe. That being said, the next steps I think is yes, we can meet with the community, right? But I think we even need to open up this conversation up to the general community as well. And if this is about public safety, if this is about making sure that people feel that they can always communicate with the police department when things go wrong, in my personal view, I believe that when you escort or observe, or when you go into the area to make sure that everyone is safe, even though that does not stop what is happening there, that takes away some of what you've been doing with the hamburgers, hot dogs, and the movies in the parks. So ultimately, I think um, the one who gets to decide whether or not they're going to engage with you, particularly the undocumented community, is the undocumented community.
Trustee Quesada, did you have any final clarifications or comments before I wrap it up?
Thank you, Chief. I know it's been a very difficult topic just to have, just going through the past year and a half that we've been going back and forth with just related items within this. I do want to thank you for all the work that you have been done for this community. You and I have sit down after you became chief, and then we sort of said, how do we engage our Spanish community? How do we make them feel safe within our? Sorry, thank you. So how do we do that? I think like it was said, someone that knows me here in the board, I always had been trying to make our building department better. How do we improve? How do we make things to work for our community itself? To the homeowners, even to the contractors, even to some big developers. How do we improve our building department to make that ability? So to me, it's always a work in progress. Sure, we changing two laws like I mentioned before. We're going to be doing some communication. So it's always something that we work to be better than any other community. So the same thing with our police department. We have done a lot of work. Yes, it's not going to stop, but how do we improve this? Open up relationships with some community members that may not have been there before. That's how we do this. I know what someone you mentioned, Detective Chavez. He was, I think, twice, or somebody, another member of the police department was actually on a Facebook Live for Padres Hispanos, and they were talking about different topics. Whatever they got the comments, they brought it up, and they were very informative to the Spanish community within itself. So how do we do that? So yes, I expect, hoping to get some more feedback from you within the next 2 weeks, I guess. Now that we have off next week, so how do we make that relationship better? How do we improve this? We oftentimes when we're doing laws for our community, we rely on experts. Sure, we said, oh, this is what our village engineer says. This is his recommendation. So we take that, or we hire a consultant to do this. We have a police officer that is our chief, and he's the expert in what.
We consider, just to clarify, we consider any department head.
Correct.
The professional is
A professional. So we hire to get their opinions. Totally agree with that statement. So I would like to see what the recommendations that you may have with this. I think I agree with 100% what Rick had mentioned before. We are immigrants. A lot of us are. We came here. So it's just different. My kids will be in 10 years from now. They'll be in a different stage. It'll be something different. The hot topic will be totally different from what we're talking about right now. So thank you. Yes, definitely.
Okay. If I didn't say it when we began this conversation, I want to say thank you very much to everyone in the community who has reached out to us. Every organization, every individual who's emailed us. People stopped by and saw me on Tuesday. They've called all of us. They stopped us in the grocery store. And that's largely from our community. And we've reached out to folks in other communities as well. And I know we've all brought a lot to the table today and could talk for hours longer, but we won't do that. I do want to make sure that that people know that not only do we read their emails, but some of their concerns have helped inform tonight's conversation. We received one particular email from someone who is a social worker with children who expressed a hope that OPD involvement, regardless of exactly how that is that it does not exacerbate how children will experience ICE raids because it can be such a horribly traumatic experience for children. What I have heard tonight is the presence of OPD or not will have you know, unfortunately, no impact. It's going to be traumatic for the children, and whether we are there or not, it's is not going to change that. Certainly not for the worse, since we're likely not to be involved unless something's gone horribly wrong. But another comment that was made, which I've heard echoed a number of times on social media as well as in some of our emails, is this is basically the only pushback we have against the federal government. In a time where the federal government is very hostile to the immigrant community, which, as you know, is a direct attack on a large percentage of people in our community, this is a step we should take. And I very much understand that sentiment, that there is an incredible amount of frustration and a feeling of impotence. And how do we try and balance the hateful, hostile rhetoric and policies and practices coming from the federal government toward immigrants? And this is a board, every board that I've been involved with, we have on occasion made public statements to state and federal authorities expressing our concern about a policy. So that in itself, it's not that we don't ever comment on public policy at higher levels of government. But I think what I've heard tonight is that this board genuinely wants to find a path forward that is right for this community, and how can we strengthen the relationship and the trust between the police department and the Hispanic community. And I look at some of the statements from other mayors, and on sort of one extreme was a conversation between the mayor of Chicago in the wake of the threats of the ICE raids in recent weeks when she was on NPR. And the question was asked, if we imagine an ICE raid and it being a rather large-scale effort, they might send immigration agents into an apartment building, hypothetically, to pick up some people. And they might ask the Chicago police for backup to clear the streets, to be ready in case anything goes wrong. You're telling me that the Chicago police aren't going to do that. And the mayor said, we're not going to do that. That is not our role as local law enforcement. We have to make sure that we're maintaining good relationships with people and communities. I find that to be quite concerning. If a federal law enforcement agency has said, we are concerned that there might be a need for support to keep the community safe, and the response is that they won't engage at all. And that actually would be inconsistent with our existing policy when a federal agency comes in and asks for help. That's not what we're talking about here. Typically, we're not talking about a federal agency coming in and asking for help. And actually, largely when, to my knowledge, when ICE comes here, it's not a criminal matter. Typically, it tends to be a civil matter, because immigration law is a civil matter. Or you're saying that that's not true. When they're coming, it typically is criminal?
It really depends. We've had criminal, we've had civil. It really depends.
Good. Not good, but thank you for clarifying. Although I would like to think that the people who are leaving because they present imminent harm to our community. I know that's not always the case. There's also been discussion about a lot of Westchester communities, and I know that in the city of New Rochelle, their position from elected officials to their directive to their police department is that they believe that the larger cause of trust is best served by having as much separation between ICE and local police as possible. That said, if there was an anticipated public safety concern where they sought the assistance of the local city police, then that would be different and they would be more involved. So there's a range of how different communities perceive an appropriate interaction with ICE. And I'm generally someone who in life believes that more information is better. And we get more information from ICE than the understanding is in New Rochelle, where they're given very generic information that they will be in the community. They're not provided with any names or locations, which we obviously are because we show up. And as you said, you then are able to provide some of that information to the school district as it might be helpful. I think what what I've been really struggling with in the last week to understand is our role as a village board. And we have a particular role for oversight of the police department, but for every department, we establish big picture policy. And what does that mean in this instance? You mentioned village engineer. We say to Paul, look, one of the biggest concerns we get is paving. So we are going to put as much money into the paving budget as you can possibly make use of in a year, because we want as many streets to be paved as possible. And we have increased the paving budget every year. Please pave as much square footage of this village as we can. And that's where the conversation ends. We don't say, this is how you pave a road. And so exactly how does that translate to the police department? I think what I'm hearing tonight, at the very least, loud and clear, is we want you to prioritize and expand how the police department is going to strengthen relations with the Hispanic community. You've done a lot of great outreach that is family focused, like the movies and the kickball games and the block parties, and all of that is great. And it was about 3 years ago when you and I were at Park School, and there were packed cafeteria with mostly Spanish-speaking parents. And their questions at that time were largely about driving and having their cars impounded and not having licenses. And we've come a long way on that. And you were a really helpful voice, particularly among law enforcement, where chiefs in these other communities were not stepping up and saying that it was really important for everyone to have driver's licenses. And these are the reasons why from a law enforcement perspective. And I don't know exactly when your position came to that, but I know it was an evolution. And I believe that our policy of how our police department engages with the Hispanic community and interacts with ICE is also going to be an evolution. God forbid this is how ICE conducts itself for more than a couple of years. I mean, we hope that there's going to be a change in how people in our community are able to feel safe in their own community. And that's going to have to start with our behavior here. So if there is a directive that I'm hearing loud and clear, it is that we are asking the Austin Police Department to very much prioritize expanding and improving relations with the Hispanic community. And I think that needs to go beyond family-friendly events, and it needs to be more regular, ongoing engagements with just grown-ups in a room, asking difficult questions like we did that night. And I'm sure you weren't prepared for the questions that necessarily came that night. It ended up being a really interesting conversation, and it doesn't happen enough. There are a lot of Know Your Rights programs going on. Hispanic members of our community are so much more informed with how to interact with ICE when they come to the door today than they were 2 years ago. There's another one coming up, I believe, in the next couple of weeks at St. Anne's, and I'm sure that information is available. There might be somebody in this room that can tell us. And I also hope that part of the police department prioritizing the relationship with the Hispanic community is to, you guys should know exactly what are members of our community learning when they go to these Know Your Rights programs. Not that you should sit in the same room at the same time. That might not be the best environment, but you should learn what is all that information that our immigrants are learning. When ICE is coming to them, what are their rights as they understand them to be? I think there's a lot of positive steps that can be taken that are really consistent with who we are as a community as Austin figures out what is the path forward for us. Okay. We're gonna.
Sorry, everybody. I took all the time.
Not at all. Not at all. This was a really
It was
important
necessary.
topic, and all of us really needed to hear and be heard.
But just I know
Need to
we're gonna
clarify
wrap up.
something?
No. I just I'm very intentional, and because I did propose this and have done a lot of outreach regarding this particular conversation the past 2 weeks. I want everyone to know my intention and where we are. So I do support all that you said, and I look forward to learning about the new possibilities about how to expand outreach and how to really make it more concrete, mainly for adults, to actually have those conversations and really get the answers in a factual and clear manner. However, I will not be supporting, nor do I support the continuation or expansion or embracement of the continued presence at scenes. I'll be part of helping with the outreach, but the continuation of the practice is something that I just can't personally, professionally, politically.
I think we understood that coming into this conversation.
But I do want to be clear to the chief. He's here, and also to the public that yes, when it comes to our programming, I'll be more than happy to be part of that process. The meetings, know your rights. I'm not so sure about having an officer there, but we could.
No, I don't think that has. I think the officer should know what the information is.
Yeah,
that the
yeah,
immigrants are
just
here.
because that's more like the legal side. But I am happy we had this conversation because I think a lot good came from it.
I agree.
In a time where it's needed. Am I disappointed by the disagreement? Yes. Am I hopeful for possible change in the future when we outreach to our residents about what tonight's outcome was, and maybe that will change in a few days or months? Yes.
I also want to echo that I'm still in support of the initial ask that me and Trustee Herrera had put out in the initial press release, as well as supportive of the conversations. But I just want to continue to reiterate, and I just want to say this: for me, I don't consider myself an immigrant, because of the nature of the American chattel slavery. However, for me, and this is just how I personalize it, is if I escape slavery, I am a fugitive. And I get over to the line, and the slave catcher comes and gets me. And then they're being observed as I'm being snatched to go back down south. I'm not going to trust the person.
I got to stop.
No, no.
I have to stop you because you're equating us to slave owners.
No, that's not what I said.
But you
That's not what I
say
said.
that,
That's
and that's
not-
what people are going to
that's-
hear.
That's not
That's
what I
an
said.
awful analogy.
That's
When
not
you
what I said.
but when you bring that up in the context of this, and you say that a fugitive slave is snatched up and somebody's there watching, you're equating us to that.
Sorry.
That is not
Point of
what
order.
we are.
Chair. No, he's
No.
an elected official. He has the opportunity to give his closing remarks. Okay. Just saying.
Finish your comment.
So the point is whether or not, listen, ICE is legal. This immigration issue is a legal issue. A lot of people feel strongly about immigration. When you talk about safety, there are people, when they're doing their job, they're no longer safe. So however you figure it out, that you can still keep trust while standing by, while families are being split apart, while people are going to different places in cages, then by all means, try to figure it out. But that's just for me.
Okay. I don't want to go round in circles, especially not on this piece of the conversation. I will just remind everyone, as was stated earlier, whether we are present or not, we cannot stop ICE from taking the actions that they are going to take. We are not able to step in. So whether we bury our head in the sand and refuse to get information or have conversations, or we observe it, is not going to change if these people are detained by ICE, rightly or wrongly. That's something that we have to work on in the ballot box in 2020. Okay, let's take a quick break. It's 10 o'clock. Then we will come back and handle the rest of our agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move things a little bit out of order and jump down to honorary street naming. And thank you, Stuart, for providing us with a draft. We've all had an opportunity to read it, and I believe it's linked on our website. So Rika and I were just having a spirited discussion about the key point 1C, which has to do with the length of time of the proposed. Oh, none of that? Wow.
No, it was coming.
Here, maybe it's coming from mine.
Rika and I were just having a spirited discussion about the length of time the proposed honoree must have resided, which is currently as at least 5 continuous or non-continuous years, which we both agreed was a silly amount, and I said just eliminate the number altogether, and Rika said no, make it 20.
I just think that one of the criteria should be the number of years a person continuously lives in the village. I think there has to be that parameter because I think you have to be here for a while. You can come in a year, do some whiz-bang thing, and that's it. It for me prevents, let me say it this way. For me, the time is a parameter that future boards and people who make decisions look at it and say that there's a continuity to the person, whatever act it is that they're being honored for. I think 5 years is a little short. I'm actually going towards a higher amount. I'll settle for about 10, and I just want to see if any other board members think that's an important parameter to work with or not, and that's what we were sort of discussing.
All right, so I actually agree with the mayor because if someone does amazing things to the point where someone wants to name a street after them, I don't want to limit it to 20 years or 10 years or 5 years. Someone comes here and moves to Austin and does something amazing that puts us on the national map, we can name a street after them.
We are on the national map. I just want to tell you, we are. We technically are.
Okay.
I know what you mean.
We got the idea.
All right.
Public awareness.
Okay. Anybody else?
I live on Peter Falk Place. I know the house that he supposedly grew up in. I don't know how long he lived there. I don't believe he lived there as an adult. So maybe he lived there for 5 years. Maybe he lived there for 20 years. I really don't know. But he became Columbo, and people wanted to name something in his honor, and he showed up.
He actually grew up here.
Yeah,
That's
right.
But
It's in the history. What do you mean you don't know? It's like
did he live here his whole? But he probably didn't live here for 20 years. He might have
But-
left when he was 18.
He graduated class of 42 with my parents.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And did he stay here after 18 years old?
Okay, was he
born in Ossining? So, I mean, like, the point is, like, he may not have lived here 20 years, but he considers it his hometown, and he has a connection to us. And he could have lived here for 5 years and then gone off and cured cancer, and we'd want to claim him too. Not him, maybe, because that's not his story, but somebody.
Yeah.
Does anybody have anything else they like or don't like about this aside from
The years
what
matter to you?
You don't care. 1, 2, 3. Manny?
I actually
I
agree,
sort of
I actually
think I
agree with
lost-
Rika. I think this,
Oh, it's
it's a significant amount of time that we dedicate. Someone will dedicate themselves to this community, and I get it. Someone moves in within a year and does something amazing, but anybody can do something amazing and just not being part of the community. You can just be it could be someone that a commuter that travels all the time, and just because that person did something amazing.
Commuters are amazing too.
No. What I'm saying, no.
But it may
Believe
not
me,
be
I know,
relevant to
but
that
not
process.
relevant to that.
Yeah.
To that effect. So I think timing it matters.
Somebody
I
could
think-
move. I'm sorry.
So members on the community, it's like you can say, you know what, Joe Smith, we're gonna name it. It's like, but I don't know the guy. He was my neighbor. He been here a year. I really don't know that person. So I think sort of like the time itself it matters. With at least to me, I think that 10 years definitely. 5 years is too small. 10 years, I actually will agree with 20 years, but 10 years I think is something that I can live with.
Whenever we create a law or a policy, we always have to balance being broad enough so that it can be applied in any future scenario and being specific enough so that it can be applied with the original intent. In this case, I don't think it's very difficult for us to come up with a variety of scenarios where the number of years may not be relevant. Somebody could move here in 8th grade, apply to be part of the science research program, go through our wonderful Ossining High School science research program, and go on to do something remarkable in the world. And we sure as heck want to be able to name a street after them if somebody proposes it. And they may have lived here from 8th grade to 12th grade. And Ossining had a significant influence on why they became the remarkable innovator that they became. I'm just saying, I have no idea what the scenario is going to be. We have to have some faith that if there is a frivolous proposal for an honorary street naming, that the rest of the process is enough due diligence to eliminate that from having every street corner be named for someone unworthy.
And the board can always say no, right?
Right.
Yes.
Right, there we
It's
go.
difficult for a board to have to
It's-
say no. So she's trying to, be realistic,
I'm sure,
and not
like,
politicize it
I
too
mean,
much.
we have a lot of boards, and they always come back and say, I wish you guys would give us more parameters because they're volunteers who don't feel like, dealing with open-ended questions. This is not a life and death scenario.
There was
This is
3.
about trying to set up a policy, this is not one I'm gonna die over if you guys, it's a 3-2, it's a 3-2. It's,
No,
I don't
it's
know.
I
You
didn't have an
said,
opinion.
you said you don't have an opinion? I thought you said you were supportive
No, no, I
of
said
a-
I don't think that there should be a.
Oh, okay.
Right. That's right,
Okay.
so I'm
All right.
hearing a
Oh,
3-2.
good. I thought it was more like I didn't,
I'm
I don't
hearing
care.
a
Oh, no,
three.
you had,
Three.
you
So
you
next
had
time.
a three.
Moving on. Any other comments on the honorary street naming policy? And
And then,
then what's the next step, sir?
Well, I'll strike the language that you have indicated
Want me to
you
just give
want
it to you?
stricken, and then you can vote on it on August the 7th, and you can then proceed with our first application to go to the village historian.
Thank you. I wouldn't necessarily strike all of item C because I think the
I wasn't-
application.
Mayor,
Okay.
I'm just taking out where it says the proposed honoree shall have resided in the village for at least 5 continuous or non-continuous years during his lifetime.
Excellent.
give them this.
Great.
They had to have visited
Yeah,
once.
just
This Sandra visited at least once.
to him.
Like de Tocqueville.
Okay,
Okay.
we're getting
Well,
close.
good. Anything else we need to do at 10:20 at night? Moving forward.
Okay, so next up, we have, now it's accounting system. So we'll ask our treasurer, village treasurer, Tom Warren, to come up.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the Board of Trustees. This afternoon, I believe you were sent an email with the memos that I wrote today on the accounting system and financial advisor. I've got paper copies if anybody would like to.
I would like a paper copy, please.
I will
It's
as
helpful.
well. Yep.
Thank you.
You just pass the whole thing over. We'll.
What time did you send it?
Earlier.
No, it was at a
Earlier.
reasonable hour in the day. It's just I didn't print it out.
Okay, it was a simple question, so I can look up the emails.
I think it's this evening.
We're a little excited.
No, it wasn't.
So 2 weeks ago, we were here to request the board to consider changing to a new accounting systems, and the board has some concerns. So the next day, we took those concerns, and the concerns dealt mostly with the upfront payment of the fee for the licenses and the conversion and implementation. So we took those concerns back to our sales rep, and Stuart walked in during our conversation, so he was part of it as well. And he was agreeable for Edmunds to bill that fee over a 3-year period of time. So that was the one issue, and we followed that up with a conversation with the implementation and conversion team because I was asked, I thought that this was a off-camera question. I'm not sure if this was actually asked on camera, asking for better confirmation of the implementation timeline. So we gave them a September 1st contract signature date, although certainly if a contract was signed earlier, then that would move us up hopefully by a few weeks on the schedule, because they don't schedule anybody until they actually have a signed contract. So assuming the September 1st contract signing date, they went through the process, and it was determined that we would be live with our financial suite and payroll April 1st, 2020. But the problem with us is that that is right when we are hot into getting ready for the audit. So, March is busy with the audit. April, the auditors are here for a total of 3 weeks. So in order to us to set that time aside and then get back to finishing the conversion, we were really looking at a June 1st implementation date for the financial suite and the payroll records, and then the water utility and taxes implementation would be done in September. I'm sorry, August. Although because we sent out the tax bill in December, we wouldn't actually be using the new admin software for the actual tax billing until the 2021 year, although we'd be able to convert over any of the unpaids and collect from August through the end of the year and become more familiar with that module as well. And then they followed that up by sending us the implementation chart showing the tasks and the dates, which was also attached to the memo. So are there any questions?
Thank you for the memo. And so help me out with this one, because part of the conversation that we were having last work session was we had a proposal. I believe, Stuart, you were going through the contract. Correct. And also we wanted to figure out what was the percentage of the contract and the amount that the town and the village will have to pay. How is that divided? Is that part of your memo? And if it is,
that was part of the memo 2 weeks ago, where it had been allocated. We were generally assuming that software was split 50-50, with the exception of course, the utility billing. That would be 100% village expense.
Stuart, have you get the chance to go over the contract with the town as well?
I've not. Interesting, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, the prior contract with Tyler, actually, the town was not a signatory to that contract.
Okay.
They were not, which was actually something I think that the folks at Edmonds were actually somewhat surprised about. If you look at the prior contract, it's signed by former manager Zambrano, but there was no sign-off by the town to that contract. We would want the and in fact, I think it's better to have the town obviously a part of that contract, and we will communicate with them. The key question was the ability to get the payment sort of over time, and they were readily agreeable to that, and said, in fact, that's generally what they do with many of their communities. But yeah, I have not followed with the town yet. I will do that. It's a fairly straightforward contract. It's in fact less complicated than the Tyler one. But the town would sign off on this one. They, as I said, were not a signatory to the last contract.
And I have some new information, Stuart, because Dale and I did go upstairs and talk to the town supervisor and the budget officer about this. She did ask for some additional information from us, including a more detailed description of what each of the modules were, because they wanted to make sure that they wanted, whether or not they wanted to be included on all the modules. Like, for instance, they might not be interested in the HR module. So that's a task that I owe her. And also, she asked if I could tabulate data pertaining to the usage of the current system between village and town. But they did say that they would like to be, have a signature line on the contract for themselves as well.
What is the time frame from you commenting to us? Because I know you asked to for us to be pretty much, you wanted us to have an agreement with them.
We were looking for a resolution to authorize the village manager to sign a contract subject to review by Corporation Counsel.
But we're not ready just yet, because you still need to have some information to the town supervisor. We still need to meet with their attorney in regards to that, so we're still not ready yet. Am I correct?
Well, you could be ready to have a resolution to permit the village manager to sign. And in the meantime, we'll work on the language in the contract. But in terms of having a resolution to allow the village manager to sign off, that resolution can certainly be presented.
Okay. That's what I want to understand, that part. We can sort of move forward.
Sure.
Parallel with getting all this information. So, because I'm assuming now the town has to do the same thing. Sure, they have to pass a resolution at some point, or they don't have to do that.
I'm sure that they would have to. I'm sure that they would have to, and do the same thing. But this would just authorize, when there is a contract, that the village manager could sign off, and I would have my conversations with the town attorney so that everything can get, all put together. I'm sure that they'll have certain language that they may or may not want in, and then we also have to obviously communicate with the legal side over at Edmonds to make sure that they're okay with whatever additional language. But it's a basic contract, and we just have to now, refine the payment terms, because they're going to be different than just one upfront payment.
Would you update us? At least, would you update me at some point in what the town says in regards to that? I would like to see a copy of the contract, obviously, before it gets signed into that effect.
Oh, yeah, I mean, before any contract is signed, I'll certainly will be happy to go over it with all of you. But as you say, we can certainly work on a parallel track to at least get the authority for the village manager to sign off and take it from there, sure.
Me personally, I'm okay with this, Pat, as long as we follow the steps and going through the process. I wouldn't want it kind of slow down this process, 'cause I think this program, for the little bit that I seen in the conversations that I had with Tom and some of his staff, I think it's something that will be appropriate for us to move forward with.
So I'm fine with it. I guess I thought you were asking a different question, which was, we passed the resolution once we see a completed data in front of us with everything resolved, or we can pass the resolution out, really giving authority to Karen to sign when
Right,
it is
that's-
done and will be updated. So I think it doesn't matter to you, it seems. You're
No, because
okay?
right now we're just
That's
giving
fine.
the authority to Karen just to sign.
Right.
We're not saying we're going to sign this right now, because we still have to go through the process.
But we don't sign, she does.
Yeah,
So once you
of
give her
course, yeah.
resolution to,
Yeah.
once you give her permission to sign, it sort of, you're done.
When the contract's done.
She's
Correct.
signing, and she's not coming back, so,
Subject to my review of the contract.
Right.
understood.
And our review for the contract as well, because that's, to me, is like, if we want to add some stuff into it, so it's not just like it's going to get done and move on, so.
Well, our feedback would, I'm assuming,
Correct.
if I'm wrong, our feedback would be before it goes to Karen and as Stuart is reviewing, right? So,
It would be, yes,
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah,
I wouldn't,
correct.
nothing would be signed until everybody approved it and was final.
Correct.
I think the resolution, however, allows you, it could be done before all of that.
The
To give you
resolution you
permission
could
to
do
sign,
now,
right,
but,
right.
you know, you,
If
Got
there's
it.
a substantive change from
Right.
what
Right.
has been discussed, then it should come back to
That's all.
us.
Okay, I have a question, actually. Just, not really a comment, just based on the experiences, and maybe I'm stating the obvious, and you could say I'm stating, and that's okay, but I'm going to do it anyway, which is one of the issues that we've had with previous contracts, especially for some reason in this area, is that we are not clear on milestones and how we get our money back when milestones are not met by the vendor. We got to learn from that. There's got to be a safety latch here. Maybe they'll say, well, you need it on your side too, but we're the client and we're the ones paying. And until we pay, we have some leverage, because once we write the check, apparently we have no leverage anymore. And, the idea that we'll sue and all that, I'm not buying it. I keep getting told if it doesn't work out, we'll sue. And then I get told that it's not worth suing. So, I really would appreciate, I'm not telling you what to put in the contract, but I'm just asking that milestones be put in, that we get money back, and that it is written as clearly as you can make it. That would make me very happy. The details, and how that happens, I leave in your hands. But that's one of the learnings I have.
Yeah, I think that's part of the conversation we had, because I believe Stuart mentioned that Tyler actually had some of these milestones in that on some clauses in regards to, what happens if, and this particular contract was not as clear as defined as that. So I believe that's something that, we'll be looking for as well, so.
We'll look to that, and I'm sure, yes.
Thank you.
Understood.
I'd like to delve a little bit more into where we are with that. That's my bigger concern, because you seem very optimistic that this software is going to serve us better than what we've been struggling with for the last few years, and that's great. I hope it does. Stuart, where are we with clawing back our money from Tyler?
It's proceeding. I mean, I don't know when.
It's in the courts.
Yeah, I don't know when I don't know when you're gonna hear anything.
And what's the best case scenario?
Could be a year.
And how much money? It was the best case scenario.
I gotta go check. I don't know. It
Six
was-
figures, though?
Yeah.
Okay. And I just want to confirm my understanding from the last time, Tom. There is going to come a day when we will no longer be dealing with KVS at all, correct?
Right.
which is our current, which has been our software for all of the modules for many times. Some have transitioned over to Tyler, and
We have
ultimately it
payroll-
will all be Edmunds.
We have payroll on KVS going back to like 1990. So, you know, you're right. You know, I think we need to get that data extracted into some type of a usable format that we could still query. Because, you know, the retirement system is always asking for, you know, payroll information.
Right, but some stagnant documentation that can just be served without us having to maintain the several $1,000s a year service fee to
Yes,
have
yeah.
KVS, when we're no longer using them actively going forward. And so, did you have an estimated time? I can look back on my notes, because I think you did mention it. Well, I just thinking now. When it's likely that KVS will no longer be,
Well,
does that happen like as soon as Edmunds takes over, or we're gonna need another year to be able to transition information?
I would say that we would probably need another year. The fee that we paid recently was like July to July.
Okay,
And if we end payroll on KVS in the middle of 2020, I would think that we would still want access to that for a full year. You know, plus we're still going to be using KVS for water billing and taxes up until the time that's implemented on Edmunds. So
but ultimately, all of everything that's on KVS today will eventually be on Edmunds going forward. I understand that the retrieving
We're not
preserving
gonna-
the old data is.
we're not going to be converting a lot of history.
Yeah, that's fine, but I mean, but all
Except
of
for,
those
like, if you-
modules, all those functions will be handled by Edmunds going
Yes.
forward. Okay. So the Edmunds functions, all of these modules are the same as what we thought we were getting from Tyler. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Because even when Tyler came in, what, that was 2015, so that was 4 years ago, they said it would be 18 months to implement, right? Or did they say it would be a year and a half? Did they say 36 months to implement?
It was going to be a multi-year process.
I think 18 months. I think it was a year and a half, right? They said it would be a year and a half. I'm delighted that this is less. They have it as a duration of 95 days with an acknowledgement in their notes that if detailed conversions are needed for payroll and finance, that would extend phase one over timeline by 1 month. Is the expectation truly that it will take 95 days to do all the modules and have them all up and running? Is that really what I'm understanding?
I think that 95 days was the financial suite.
Oh, that's just, oh,
One.
oh.
Just phase one.
Okay, so then another 58 days. So 95 plus 58, so we're talking about 153 days. Right? Okay. And then if it goes over, do they charge us for all the extra work that they weren't anticipating because we're more complicated than they realized?
If it goes over, meaning like it takes longer,
Yeah.
I would think that would be
That's not
on
what I
us.
So they anticipate, they predict that it'll take 153 days to do phase one and phase two, and at the end of that, everything will be functioning. And if it takes more than that, then they're gonna charge us for the extra time that they didn't anticipate it would take, because it's our fault for being more complicated than they realized.
I think that if we're still within the number of days that they've allocated for training and such, there would be no additional charge.
But what if it's not within the number of days? Because, I mean, didn't that come back to us with Tyler? Am I mistaken?
There were charges post, correct.
Yeah, and I don't want that anymore. I don't want to,
Well,
I don't
we
want to pay
learned-
for other people not doing their job as well as they
We
thought they
learned a
could.
lot from the first, the general ledger implementation with Tyler, because when we started talking about the next implementation, actually, I think we're talking about water utility, and they gave us, a calendar that had way more days than what was in the contract. And I called them on it, and I said, your contract says that you could do this job in 24 days, spread over however many months that it takes. And they were giving us like 50 days. And so I said, please give me a new schedule that fits the 24 days, and they did. So, you know, if we said nothing, they would have spent 50 days on it. But,
It
you
didn't
know,
get done anyway, did it?
it did not. We started on working on payroll. We had a couple of mandatory days, and then we built our own database, and didn't, and so, you know, we were ready to go live, and we did not use many days that were allocated in the contract.
I do
that
want to
would-
learn, I do want to learn from our experience, and I don't want us to enter into a contract that is doomed to failure or doomed to go way over the anticipated budget.
And I think that we did learn a lot. You know, we learned, you know, because we had a leader that was taking the lead on, you know, bringing in Munis, and I had a, you know, warm spot in my heart from a prior job where we used Munis. But, you know, I think that we've thoroughly researched this. I think we've asked the right questions. We've had users from the village and the town in to, you know, sit with them and go through demonstrations that they didn't charge us for.
Well,
Yeah.
they're selling us right now, so they should.
I think that we feel confident that we're making the right decision this time.
Thank you for your professional opinion.
I do want
I
to
see
see
what
what
you
the,
folks want in the contract.
right, I would like the contract to provide us as much protection as possible, that we're not going to end up spending a lot more money than we're anticipating, regardless of whether and when it goes over
That
the anticipated
instruction
timeline.
is loud and clear.
Awesome, thank you. All right, what's next?
I'd like to talk about something that's much more interesting
What?
because
Everything you do is
What do you
interesting,
mean?
Tom.
At least to Tom and me.
you know, this is like one of those behind the scenes activities. We have a financial advisor. I occasionally mention the financial advisor, you know, especially when we go out and issue serial bonds, or last year when I brought you the refunding opportunity to refinance 2007 and 2010 bonds for a savings of just less than $500,000 over like a 12-year period of time. So in any event, our current financial advisor is Capital Market Advisors. We've been with them for 10 years. When they bought the local office of another company that was located up in Hopewell Junction. Generally, the financial advisor's primary duties are to discuss and advise with a plan of financing for capital projects and other items such as, you know, we have issued bonds for tax certiorari claims during the recession when we were hit with a bunch of large claims. Also, the financial assists us with access to the capital markets to issue the bonds and notes. And they also help us prepare the official statement, which is similar to a sales prospectus, to try to sell the bonds and notes to the capital markets. They also work with our bond counsel on the official statements. They do the advertising, and they solicited the bids for the bonds and the notes, and they verify the calculations and make the recommendation of accepting the lowest interest bidder. They also assist us with obtaining a Moody's bond rating if such is needed. And they also help us with the preparation and filing of the annual continuing disclosure filing that's required by the Securities and Exchange Commission to help protect the bondholders. And that's a filing that's due 6 months after year end, which for us is June 30th, that this document is to be filed. So in the middle of June, all of a sudden, the local office up in Hopewell Junction, most of the employees quit and started their own new firm. And There was a lot of turmoil, but despite that, we got the required filing done by June 30th. And, but we felt very uneasy about what had happened, and that we kind of felt that we were in the mix of this. So I discussed the situation with Dale, and we discussed it with Karen and Stuart. And we also had a similar conversation with the town, since the town was also using capital market advisors as a financial advisor. We all agreed that we would solicit requests for proposals for this type of service, something that we haven't done. I did, do some research on what such an RFP would be and what I should be asking for. And I sent out the RFP to our current firm, Capital Markets, also to this new firm that had just started up. And I also picked 2 additional firms that I knew operated in the state and were also members of the New York State Government Finance Officers Association. So we received back 4 responses, and they were all pretty much closely priced. Based on the village's adopted procurement policy, professional services don't have to be competitively bid. It's certainly a good idea from time to time to solicit RFPs. But sometimes when you evaluate proposals for professional services, you have to look at the special or technical skill that's involved, training, expertise. And the surprising thing was because I'd only asked for written proposals back, I really didn't expect phone calls asking for interviews. Our current advisor, Capital Markets, asked for an interview. And part of it was to also reassure us that they had the depth and experience to continue serving as our financial advisor. We also got a phone call from Munistat, which was one of the 4 companies, and we met with them and had quite a good discussion, and it was an interesting process. And then one of the 4 is primarily operating upstate. They're not really a downstate player. The new upstart company, even though they submitted a written proposal, when I talked to them a couple of days ago, they said that they currently cannot legally assist us.
They're being sued by the prior company, and they are currently stayed from dealing with any clients that they've had within the past year.
Okay, thank you, Stuart.
That's one of the 4, but so now it's 3.
Right, we're down to 3, and the town chose to go in a different direction, and they decided to go with Munistat. And we've been working with them for the past week and a half because the town has a bond sale next week. So we had a very tight schedule to try to get them ready for their bond sale. But I'd like to continue our relationship with capital market advisors, and I gave some reasons in my memo. Foremost, we're familiar with the quality, service, and advice that they've provided us over the years. Also, their reputation. They have a very large market share of local governments in Westchester County. They also have the local resources, including close proximity to New York City, where Moody's is, and also a lot of the financial markets are also headquartered in New York City as well. And they also have, as I mentioned, they have the depth of professionals that would be able to continue to serve the village. And one of the people that came to see us, in addition to the company president, he brought Janet Morley, who's the vice president with the firm, and she's been reassigned to head up the Hopewell Junction office. And she has experience and expertise working with clients in preparation for a credit rating call. So I also felt that that was very important given the large amount of debt that we're going to be issuing in the coming years for the Indian Brook Water Treatment Plant, and undoubtedly having to have a bond rating for this debt. I think that her expertise would be able to help us prepare for the Moody's bond rating.
Does anybody have any questions for Tom? I assume when they came, oh, go ahead.
I had a quick question. So you said the price was pretty much very close to each other. So you were talking about the price being very close to each other. What was it the same as we are paying now?
Yes and no. We have to pay the annual continuing disclosure fee, which they proposed no change in that fee. They did reduce the other costs a little bit, which is based on the amount of debt that's issued, their fee is a percentage of the debt that's issued. Although it's pretty much the same dollar amount for like up to $5 million. So if it's $2 million or $5 million, it's still the same amount of work, and it's still the same fee. They did reduce those fees in order to be more competitive, and they did offer to keep these fees the same for a 2-year period of time.
What's our rating now?
We're AA2, which is still considered very high rating.
Yeah.
The next highest rating is AAA rating.
I assume when they came and met with you, that part of what they wanted to reassure you was that the departure of the folks from the Hopewell Junction office was not a reflection of their stability and capacity to be able to serve us going forward, and you were reassured by whatever it was that they told you?
Yes.
Then
Which, we've had the same individuals helping us for many years, so they've come to know us. But as happened previously, after the local office was purchased, after a couple of years, our helper up there left for another job, and we had a new guy who we had to become comfortable with, and as he learned about us. And now he's one of the ones that left. And so, it's going to be, this VP, Janet Morley, that's going to be overseeing the account and working with us. But, a lot of the work is done by us. It's pretty much, preparing the official statement and these annual disclosures. We still need to provide the data from our records and from other departments, and it goes into their template and format.
And from everything that I've ever heard from our accountants, your office does an outstanding job at preparing all of the paperwork for them to be able to work with. And this whole scenario reminds me of the kind of crazy stuff that happened with the accountants 2 years ago, I believe it was, on a federal level with investigations. And at that point, the town decided to continue with the existing relationship, and we went with a new accounting firm. So this time it's kind of the reverse.
Yeah.
Anyway, what do we need to do next? Is there a resolution next
I
week?
am asking for a resolution. This is something that's never been on the annual agenda for annual appointments. But, this is a highly regulated business, and the fees, if we're issuing, tens of thousands or tens of millions of dollars in bonds, it's going to be a pretty hefty fee. I feel more comfortable having a board resolution appointing them and authorizing signing a contract. Signing a contract is one of the things that the SEC requires be done to do this type of work, which is a big improvement. I used to talk to our fiscal advisor, prior to 2014 and say, I can't believe that there's no contract required to do this type of work. And now the SEC requires that there be a contract to do this type of work.
Okay, well, I'm glad you think that the regulation is beneficial in protecting the taxpayers of Ossining and that it's working out well. Thank you. we'll look forward
Thank
to
you, Tom.
voting on the resolution in 2 weeks because we have a fifth Wednesday, which you may have heard.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Next, we have notification of proceedings before land use boards and possible revision to village code.
You're going to be joined by
See,
Tracy.
Tracy
Tracy, you
Corbett.
could have gone for dinner and probably breakfast and come back, but thank you for staying.
just a brief lead-in before any questions and Tracy chimes in. These are 3 proposed local laws, 6, 7, and 8. I guess once I get started, I can't stop. But 6 is really a change to the zoning code. And because it's a change to the zoning code, what this board would have to do is refer this to the planning board for their recommendation, and then it would come back to you. But what the 3 have in common, 6, 7, and 8, is basically to expand the notification to land use boards to include posting of a sign or signs at the particular property where the application would be pending. There is a minor change at the very beginning of Local Law 6, which is to increase for the zoning board when the mailing must be made. The zoning board has a mailing of only 5 days before. All the other boards are 10. So the thought was to at least make that consistent. But the notification signs, is something Tracy and I have spoken about for a while as to, how to do this. And with regard to zoning, any application that goes for a land use activity, so that could go to this board for a special use permit, it could be to the planning board, Board of Architectural Review, ZBA, or HPC. There must be notification signs placed on the property no later than 10 calendar days prior to the initial public hearing. It details where the sign has to be located, the size of the sign. What I wrote to you in my memo earlier this week, in the town of Ossining and in the town of Yorktown, the municipality provides the signs. And it's basically a fee that is part of the application fee. What I have here is what appears in Rybrook, in Portchester, and in other municipalities, is essentially what the sign should say, but it is, bless you, the responsibility of the applicant to essentially prepare the sign. And it's really up to this board in terms of which they think is better. This also provides, for example, when the sign must be removed, how the sign has to be maintained, and so it provides essentially notice to folks driving by. There'll be a phone number, and they can basically call the number and find out what it's all about. It will say when the particular hearing is. It will have to be updated if, in fact, it is carried to different meetings, so people will know. The other 2 local laws, and one other thing that's here is that in Ossining, in the town of Ossining and in Yorktown, and for all of these ordinances, there has to be proof submitted to the planning board or planning department, both photographic proof and an affidavit that they've actually put the sign up so that it's been there and it's been maintained. In the town of Yorktown and the town of Ossining, if that is not submitted, the application cannot be heard. But in other municipalities, and I have put in what the other municipalities have, the board can basically determine, did the applicant do enough? And this is more in the case of, let's say the sign is up and someone knocks the sign down, but it has been up for 3 weeks, but it comes down a week before the hearing. The board may decide, it's been up, it was up for long enough, we're going to allow the proceeding to go forward. But it's a board decision, the particular land use board. Again, that's something this board can discuss. The other 2 local laws, 7 deals with Chapter 233, which is subdivision of land. That deals with preliminary plats and final plats. That also requires notice, so we wanted to include that. The difference in this, in 6 and 7 and 8 from number 6, is that because many of these subdivisions may be quite large, it requires that the sign be every 300 linear feet. And The local law number 8 deals with telecommunications, which again requires notice. So the thought was that we should also require that the posting be for those particular properties where that in fact happens. We have no pending telecommunication applications at this time, but it would just be a consistency between, our other laws with regard, if the board goes forward. So that's what this does. It does essentially puts a physical presence on a piece of property, that property is the subject of an application before one of the various land use boards. So people would know, and would be the applicant's responsibility to both post and maintain.
So with respects to, this conversation came up a lot with Hudson Step, with a lot of people saying that they didn't get the notices. And so with respects to Hudson Step, if this had been enacted, what law would have made sure that the signs were posted?
This would have put in that the signs would be up, and they would have to provide proof to the planning board that the signs were put up.
So is that local law 6 or 7?
That would be 6,
Okay.
because Hudson Step was not a subdivision.
Okay.
So Hudson Step, though, because it would come under local law 6, if it had been in existence at that
And-
time,
and
or if
accord-
they're doing the project now.
And according to local law 6, the planning board could determine when or when the applicant could remove the signs? Is that
No,
what you
no,
were saying?
no. The applicant, the sign must be removed within 10 days after the board has rendered its final decision. Otherwise, the sign is supposed to stay up unless the application is withdrawn or is basically inactive. And inactive is essentially, nothing happens for 6 months.
Okay.
But what I was saying is that the applicant is to maintain the sign and ensure it remains plainly visible. If the applicant places a sign at the time and in the manner detailed in the section, but the sign does not stand for the entire period required, the approval authority, which could be the planning board, if satisfied that the sign had stood for a sufficient period of time and that the applicant had taken all reasonable steps to restore the sign once the applicant had become aware that it was not standing, may act upon the application if the applicant can demonstrate that the failure to comply was not the applicant's fault. So if for some reason, kids come and just take the sign down, or it blows down, or something like that, but they show that they've made an effort to do it, planning board, zoning board, this board could still continue to hear it. The other thing that this provides is that, as in the case of Hudson Step, where it was before multiple boards, the sign has to reflect that it's before different boards. So if at one point it's going to be before the zoning board, it's going to have to reflect this is a hearing for the zoning board, or it's planning board, or this board for the special use.
The current notification process is by letter, is by mail.
Correct.
Could you remind us, is it the same for the planning board as the ZBA? Does it also happen for the HPC? Are there ever any notifications for the EAC? And I know one thing you're changing is the length of time to be consistent with the ZBA and the planning board. And, yeah, okay, I'm not speaking in complete sentences anymore, so just try and answer that.
Items are referred to the EAC. They don't have there's
make
no
recommendations, but not-
notification. Planning board and zoning board, they are the same, although currently in our ordinance, the ZBA does not require as it's only adjacent property owners or as the ZBA feels fit. So, but they have been expanded, and they're both notified within 300 feet of the property. And that we create that abutters list and we provide that to the applicants. HPC, we have been doing notification, although it is not a requirement under our.
It's not a requirement for a
it's the same.
certificate of appropriateness.
Yeah.
And HPC is the only board where the mailing has to be by certified mail or by personal delivery.
Okay. That's really because there's quite an expense for
Absolutely.
applicants, and like you mentioned, they could be going before more than one board, and depending on what neighborhood you're in, 300 feet could be a number of letters that are getting sent out. And so, I didn't realize that the HPC was the only one that has a certified letter requirement. And I'm not sure that that makes a lot of sense that they do.
I think the reason is because the notification there is to the property that is going to be landmarked, or the homes in the district that are to be landmarked. So it could be, and I can't say for certain, but because those homes are directly involved, that's why they have to get by
right,
certified.
and that onus is on the village to send out, because that's never coming to us by an applicant. That's being initiated by the HPC.
In almost every case, that's correct.
So right, because there's not something for a certificate of appropriateness. Okay, so that's a very different scenario then. I'm really grateful that we're having this conversation. This is something that I believe is going to be particularly valuable for the people who are in the neighborhood, whether they got the piece of mail or not. It could be, if they're a tenant, that the property owner got the piece of mail, and sometimes people aren't so good at looking at their mail. And this way, people who really use the neighborhood on a regular basis will see the sign and be able to participate in the process earlier than when they might hear about it at one of our meetings if something becomes controversial very, very far into the process, which is what we saw happen with Hudson Step. So anything that we can do to improve awareness for the community so that people might participate in a public discussion earlier in the process when applications are being considered by the land use boards, I think is a great idea, and I'm really glad that we're moving this forward. We've talked about it for a long time, and the time has come. So thank you for doing that. Or if we're making updates to the letter notification, I understand that sometimes there's like the letter of the law, but then we have what the practice is. So if the law says that ZBA applicants only need to send letters to the adjacent properties, are we holding people to a higher standard than that?
No, it actually says that the ZBA can change that it's in their purview to expand if they think it's appropriate.
And they just routinely tell people that they need to do
Well,
the 300-foot rule.
It was actually the policy when I came on here that it was 300 feet. I don't know what time when it happened. So
And can it be? And what is is there a requirement if it's not required to be certified mail? Is it becoming more common practice that they just send it regular mail and then sign an affidavit saying that they sent it?
I mean, part of the problem in my years I've been doing this is that people challenge, I never got that, so got the mailing. So that's why people like having the certified mail receipt, although it is an expense. I think in the future, I've had discussions is that it would be better if the village sent out the mailing so that we know that we did it, maybe through a postcard, and we do the affidavit in-house and not putting the onus on the owner. And if we can do it through an automated system,
We're just laughing because that was the process for years, and that was what the board wanted it to be, and then it was flipped. And okay, so
yeah, I mean, and and I do about the whole signage, and I've discussed this with Stuart, is when I was speaking with Yorktown, is the amount of information that you put on the sign that's out there, is that being a burden for us to, if the applicant is creating the sign, and then we have to review the sign and make sure the information is accurate. Yorktown actually just reuses their signs. It's generic. It just says there's an application before the board, call us. It doesn't give you any other information that on the sign. Because many people, they're driving by, they don't want to stop and get out of the car and write down the information. It's just to make it generic, and we reuse the signs, and it would be less administration for us and less work for the applicant. As
It's more work for the residents, though.
not really.
No, I actually,
if it's
You could read it right then and there.
But if you're
you gotta read
driving
it,
by-
you gotta call, you gotta talk to someone, you still be
Same
talking to
thing you
someone.
do with a letter.
you're still gonna call us.
Administrative time
Yeah.
regardless, right?
well,
No, it's-
the thing is though that if you're, it's the information isn't that straightforward, so it's better to have people call and get, because they're going to call when they get the letter anyway.
It needs to be on the website.
Or they can go to the
be on
website. They can
Either
go to the
like, call
website.
They
this
can go to the
number, or
website.
go, and then our homepage
Yeah.
needs to have a clear icon, upcoming land use board
Defeat
meetings
the whole
that is a
purpose.
similar,
It's, I mean, Yorktown said people or everyone was calling anyway, because a lot of people don't even, I mean, there are some people that don't like to stop and, feel like they're spying in on their neighbors. There is a little bit of that people, or they just don't want to, if you're driving, and there's some places it's not even safe. There's no place to park. There, it's hard
Let me
on certain
understand, what
areas.
is the goal of this?
Yeah,
Isn't the
yeah.
goal, isn't the goal of this so that the public knows when to go to actually, it's open to the public, these meetings? Isn't the goal to let people know something's going on? If you want to attend the meeting of what's going on, the house, the building, the whatever, it's in front of zoning, or it's in front of whatever. Isn't that the goal of this
Yes.
information? I mean, it doesn't matter what. Isn't that the goal? So if that's the goal, sending it to owners who may or may not be in the building is nice, and it's important to them, but I would think it would be important to the people who actually might be renting those units, who are not going to get a mailing because they're not on the mailing list.
Absolutely.
They're renting, so they're not on the mailing list. So having something in front of the building. If you're walking by, you could see it, so that solves for that. If you're driving by, you can see it. So it seems to me you're reaching more people with that signage than mailing things to owners who may or may not be in the buildings in that area, or in a house, or whatever it is. 100% of people in that community would actually see that, minus maybe landlords, if it's a rental, who may not live there. So I guess it's just a wider group. It seems to me you'd always want to start with posting on the property that's in effect, and letting the neighbors and neighborhood and people who work there, whatever, right? Because it's even not even the people who live there. It might be near where people work. It seems a wider catchment area than sending letters, to me. And I've
Absolutely.
seen this in other communities. I don't know if it's Tarrytown or when I was New Paltz, because I don't remember where I saw it, because I've been in both those places in the past month. But I've seen both in houses and in commercial, these signs. And in the commercial areas, I will point out, and I don't remember which town it's in, so I'm sorry, but the signs for the bigger properties are actually bigger. There's like a proportional thing. If it's a big thing, they put these, on posts, and it must not be done by the developer or whatever. It's got to be done by the municipality, because there's no way that was done by an individual. And the smaller, like the house that I happened to walk by, one of these lawn sign thingies that was like put in there, and there was a little date on the bottom so that it needs to be removed by, or whatever the heck it is. So
there
makes
was
sense to me.
We weren't proposing that we would stop with the letters. That's not what
No,
this
I
is.
wasn't suggesting that
Oh.
we were.
So, okay. Oh, it sounded like you were.
No, I'm saying
do-
you'd actually get more people by doing this.
Right,
Is my
right.
point.
Do any of these other communities that have the signs, whether it's Yorktown or Rybrook or whatever, do they also have letter notification?
All of them do.
All of them do. Okay.
Yeah, you'd want to, in case someone doesn't live there, and they're adjacent owner.
Portchester, for example, requires that if the address on the tax roll is not the address where the property is within the zone, you have to mail it both to the tax roll address and to the property address.
I like that.
But most municipalities just go by the tax assessor's address. But Portchester has that extra, which is essentially, that would be, in many, could be an extra mailing. But they do require, but Portchester has that.
And I would actually, there's nothing confidential in this, and so using a postcard would be cheaper and more efficient than using mail, because
Some people
they're
read them
cheaper.
more.
Well,
They don't open it.
You're talking about something that is a part of a public, that's going to be
Right,
public.
absolutely.
You don't need confidentiality for it. I'd like to get rid of the certified pieces. I mean, it's expensive.
Certified is only for HPC.
Got it. And I understand what you were saying about that, because we're initiating, or somebody, rather than the
Certified would probably also be good for when we're doing a rezoning.
Yeah. I mean, that's like.
Well,
No, I'm not sure you want that.
well, if I may, I think the reason that the zoning is only to adjacent, and one of the municipalities, I think, answers this question. Most of your zoning applications are area variances, be it your side setback, your
Right.
deck. It's generally going to be your adjacent neighbors. The difference is a use variance, because in a use variance, we're actually changing how the property is being used. So in one municipality I looked at, they actually have they actually require a much bigger radius of people to come into that, because that changes that area. But as Tracy points out, for zoning, the way our code is written is it's basically adjacent unless the board decides that should be someone else.
So does the board only insist on the 300 feet rather than adjacent when it's a use, or do they do it for all of the applications?
We do it for all of them, the same. They're
So
all 300 feet.
by what I'm hearing from Stuart, there's a logic to only having it be adjacent when we're talking about
Absolutely.
area variances. So
Or it
maybe
could
that's
be a smaller swath, it could be 100 feet.
I mean, but it really is like, how close is this deck going to be
Yeah.
to my property line when you're
Right.
imposing, that kind of thing. So that really is very logical, and I would hope that
Well,
that concern would be communicated.
It
to
could
the
also be
ZBA.
parking. Area variances could be parking, so you're getting exemption from parking, and that could impact a wider swath of, if you have
Okay,
so
fair enough.
lots
Yeah,
not.
that could be the whole block, yeah. Mhm.
Can we just go back to whether or not there's actually going to be the information on the sign,
Yeah, I
the
agree.
purpose of the sign?
I agree with Trustee Levin. If you have 189 units coming into the community, I want to know that there's going to be 189 units, and I don't want a phone number to tell me something like that. Other communities, that's fine, but
Are any of the signs that are being proposed that specific about what's actually being requested?
The sign would provide, there has to be a project description
Okay, so
and the
that's
action sought. So that's one of the provisions that would be on the sign.
189 units
exactly.
and with
Da-da-da.
parking.
Is that what would be the
Well,
description?
project description could be, it could be multifamily, need not say 189. It could say multifamily, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, how big do you
Yeah.
think these signs are going to be?
No, 'cause the
I mean,
sign's
it could
not
be-
gonna
I
be
mean,
that
It could be a
large.
big,
The sign is to be at least 3 by 4 feet, 3 feet by 4 feet.
Oh, that's actually a decent size.
I mean,
that's bigger than a regular lawn sign, yeah.
I think I'd like to know the cost of this, and when you're talking about big sign, and what the impact that would be if that's on the property owner.
3 by 4 is that a painting?
I see that, actually, you said something that, that's the reason why Victoria and I were sort of laughing, and I was actually, I wouldn't have walked out of the meeting, but it was very interesting, is that in 2018, where you just said that you would like to propose, it was changed. 2017 and prior to that, the planning department actually did all the notices. 2018, that changed. And as far as my understanding is, that didn't came from the board. That was a direct from the village manager's office and the planner's office. So that decision can be made tomorrow if you want to change that. Doesn't
Sure.
have to come from here. That's what I was told. Going back to the signage itself, and that's something that I would like to understand a little bit better. And I agree with much as information as we can to provide the neighborhood. And obviously, and I was Rika stole what I was going to ask. Is like, do we have literally yes? Because I drove through Portchester on Tuesday after reading Stuart's email, and he said, 3 by 4 feet, and literally while I was driving downtown, it was like 2 properties and 2 huge signs on commercial properties. That's exactly what he was referring to. And I was like, that makes sense on a commercial level. On a residential level, I don't see that happening, and I agree with the lawn
Like a
signs.
lawn sign.
More like a 24 by 18 or whatever that size may be. And they
Those
do
are cheap.
recycle all the municipalities, because those ferries been doing that for at least for the past 10,
So like
12
on a
years.
house, you don't need all the
Yeah.
information.
No,
Yeah.
and I think that's a big difference. And I would like to know, because Portchester, and it seems like to be like a wood sign. I'm talking about like a 3/4 of an inch plywood piece with posts in the back. So what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to propose something? So I would like to see who's providing the sign, how much the sign is going to be. So to me, I'm going back to who's paying for what. Because if I'm doing a small deck in the back of my house, and I need, I need setbacks, so I need to go to the zoning board, and I may be affecting the porch in front, so now I have to go to the planning board, sure. And if I'm trying to fix my driveway, now I have to go to architectural review board. So now I'm going to all 3 boards. So am I paying for the notifications? Am I paying for the sign? And so what is the standards? The size I get the size of the letters that you're very specific in that, and I know the color that they have to be, but can it be just as a cardboard that I can just do it myself and post it and meets the criterias? So that's what I'm saying. So we have to have standards for
Yeah,
this.
it's important that they all look the same, so when you see the sign, you know,
Correct.
there's a review at that property. The Yorktown and I think the town of Austenings are the sign of like a political sign. They're just those
Lawn
little lawn
signs.
signs.
Or plastic.
Yeah, the core plastic and, so they're weather resistant. I know in New Rochelle, they have those and then, their staff hand writes in the lines, but then that's a one-time use sign if you customize them for the project.
So I think to me, it has to be more in-depth conversation exactly coming from us, like, what are we doing? Are we having to me, it will make sense to have two types of signs, one for residential and one for commercial. I will even go even further than that for a commercial. I would like to see a rendering of the project next to that. Just so actually community actually
only
see that.
Yeah.
That's what I would like to see. Because now you don't have to describe the project if it's 188 units, if it's,
Right,
50
you're talking
units.
multifamilies,
About,
including
exactly,
that.
like
The big
Hudson
ones.
Steps, like
Right.
we're talking about Hudson Steps.
You're
I'm gonna
doing
bring
a,
those
you're
out.
talking about a rendering?
It has to be,
On a
it doesn't
sign.
have to be a rendering. It could be an elevation.
Okay.
It could be just a simple elevation, part of their drawings itself. Just put colors on, because they do have to have some sort of elevations when they go in front of the planning board, and architecture review board, or zoning
But they do
board.
change, and each month they could be changing.
I totally
and-
understand that, yes, I totally understand that, but at least the concept that we're trying to accomplish is the community that is around that neighborhood actually can visualize something like that maybe coming into the neighborhood, sure. I think that's what that's what I think we'd like to see.
When we will have to, there will have to be a staff that goes out there and make sure it's the most current. It'll be, just one more thing we have to look at, and just from an
I'm not saying we have to
administrative.
replace the rendering every time that the board has to, it's more like,
But-
what it was submitted, and we can say, be a disclaimer on the signage that application may change. So
I think this is a great idea, and I think there's a lot of support for it. And I think it's 11:20 at night, and we're not gonna really hammer out all the details tonight. But I think clearly everyone is very supportive of adding signage, and there's some initial enthusiastic support for the idea of signage requirements for single or two-family house is very different than a Hudson step, and maybe
Time
there's
to
a
pay
way to
for
just
it.
have the village recycle signs that are generic, clear statements on a lawn sign.
Sure, for area
somebody on
variances,
deck.
right.
But and then that could be the same. It doesn't have to list the dates for the zoning board and the planning. It's just going to be up there.
Correct.
Information, go to the website, and then the website needs to very clearly state, this property will be in front of the planning board on this date and link to whatever the agenda is or information. Okay, I think,
I just want to make one point.
Yeah.
Portchester does not distinguish between types of properties.
No, they don't.
Because
They
the
don't.
language that you
Right.
have in there, which the sizes and everything, that's
That came from
Portchester.
Portchester.
Okay.
No, I actually had a conversation with one of the
Yeah.
building inspectors earlier
But
today
I see
about
the
that, so
changes
yes.
that you people would like.
Yes.
okay, so you'll tweak and we'll come back and discuss at our future work session.
Yep.
So it's not going to be approved
So
immediately.
you're changing the mailing portion tomorrow? The policy in your office?
We will review that.
Which is
I mean, there's some logistics to that because of doing postcards and the printing, and we might not have the
I'm not
materials.
talking about
and stuff.
postcards, I'm talking about doing the mailing itself.
That the village would
Like
take it on.
The
will-
village takes on the
because-
mailing.
Again, so that's something that I would like to see part of this whole
Sure.
this whole theme in a way, at least in my end, because I want to know who's paying for what and what the application is itself.
Don't we know that already?
I know that. I know the application, how much the application is, but a year ago, almost a year and a half ago, I wasn't paying for the mailing.
Okay.
As an
Now I
applicant.
am.
Right.
So I'm paying for the application, and I'm paying for the mailing, now I may have to pay for the sign.
Yeah.
So I want to know what that is and what that means for a fee schedule itself.
Well, you would propose, you would just alter the application and put the 3 fees that are applicable to the applicant, right?
Can you repeat that?
Okay, let's table this and get back to, I think we're.
No, I
Yes.
think it's very simple, that's all. You would just
No.
change the application to the 3 options. The applicant would choose what is applicable to them, and you would know what they're paying for, right?
Yeah, but do we want them to pay for the mailing still? Because before, that was included in there.
Can we-
Go into
yeah.
detail. Well,
You
No,
guys
it's not,
have
because
the-
that's what we did in 2017, and 2018 came in.
Okay, but
Right.
Manny, don't you just want the staff to come up with a plan and give it back to you rather than, I mean, you've stated
I
what
believe that's
you
what I
wanted.
said, yeah.
Everybody has said what they
Yes.
want.
I know what I have to do.
Yes.
And I will gladly accept the property tax.
It's already in our safe.
Good.
Gladly accept.
$47,406.49.
Okay.
Okay.
For the public's reference,
We're talking about-
we're saying, yes, we'll take your money from this
34
34 Eastern Avenue.
Yes.
All right,
Thank you.
do we have executive session?
30-second update.
Hey, Karen.
Personnel,
Contracts.
That is a collective
collective
bargain.
bargaining?
That's
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn into executive session for matters related to collective bargaining?
Second.
So moved.
So move, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. We will see you in 2 weeks on August 7th at the Birdsall Fagan Police Court Facility. This meeting is adjourned to executive session.